Dress sneakers.
It is like wearing sneakers.
It's the winter, and particularly like I do plenty of miles every day.
You can imagine. Well, me running up and down hallways.
Yeah, I hear you.
I'm ready to go.
The floor upstairs, the floor drives me crazy.
Oh, some of my shoes will squeak. These will squeak. These are good.
So you want to move 10A up to 5A? That's the plan.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, looks like we're live. Good.
Of course, we're making our fire and wait to the end.
That's where my kids.
Check it out.
Good evening. Today is Monday, September 16th, 2024. It's 7 p.m. I'd like to call the regularly scheduled Board of Selectmen's meeting to order.
Linda Grappo.
Troy Lemire.
Paul Marino.
Paul Harrington.
Todd Archelashi.
Glenn Albanesius.
William Hester.
Candy Perez.
William Pozo.
Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 3, agenda review.
Mr. Mayor, can we move 10A and make it 5A in the interest of helping King and King not have to wait till the end?
Second.
All in favor? Unanimous. Any other changes? Seeing none, moving on to item number 4, approval of minutes of our regularly scheduled meeting on September 3rd.
So moved.
Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Bill. Any discussion, corrections, additions? Seeing none, all in favor? Unanimous? Moving on to item number 5, citizens' comments. The Board of Selectmen welcomes public comment. Speakers will be limited to 3 minutes and may speak once. Please give your name and address. Does anyone wish to speak?
Good evening. Alexander Hubbard, 283 Colbrook Road. I'm present here today regarding the meeting that will take place on Tuesday, September 17th, regarding, quote, creating, maintaining a positive school climate. According to the posting, the superintendent will not be taking questions. My question is this: will the Winchester Board of Education be available to take questions? As parents and taxpayers, we all have the First Amendment right to assemble, speak freely, and petition our government, including local school boards, on any topic. This is about upholding the constitutional right of each American to freely express themselves, seek hearing before and redress their grievances from governmental authorities. There's a tremendous value in allowing and encouraging the public to have meaningful input into the decision-making process, especially when it comes to the safety concerns involving our children who we trust with the school with. Working for a municipality is a privilege that comes with a responsibility to hear parents' concerns and take the time to answer questions in an open forum. We should have members who encourage open dialogue, which will in turn lead to community trust and understanding. That's all I have.
Anyone else wish to speak? Seeing none. Moving on to item number 6, town managers. 5A. Moving on to the presentation of our fiscal year 23 audit by Chris King of King and Associates.
Hi, thanks for having me. I believe you all have a copy of this summarized presentation. We take take our 120-page report, instead of going through that, we have what we think are probably the highlights that you'd be interested in seeing. We do cross-reference with some page numbers if you want to go back and look at it later. So what I'll do is I'll go through that, and then at the end, I'll hand it back to you, and you can entertain questions or whatever. So we're looking at the audit from June 30, 23, and I'll just give an overview of how this is set up, the various audit sections. And for some of you, this is probably a repeat, and others of you, this may be new. But there are several major categories in a governmental audit. And you have what's called, on the front page, an annual comprehensive financial report. So it also has additional charts and schedules such as the organizational chart. It also has in the back 10-year trends. So you can look at fund balance trends for 10 years, revenues, expenditures, and things like that. So beyond the introductory section, there's an auditor's report, just page 8. It's actually 3 pages long. It's what you consider a clean or a standard report. After that comes management discussion and analysis, which is a high-level summary narrative with input from town management. It's actually comparable to if you had a publicly traded company and they had to issue their 10K, and in the front there's a management discussion. There's that similar requirement for a municipality. Then you get into multiple sets of financial statements. The front is very summarized, and generally the further you go back, the more detail there is. And we'll go through some of those selected pages. After that, there are notes that give additional information on the financial statements. Then there are supplemental schedules, which again are generally more detailed in the front. Some of them roll up into the front. Some of them are 10-year trend schedules on your pension plan. Once you roll through all that in the main report, you then have 2 more or 3 more. You have, because you have more than $300,000 of state-sourced grants every year, you have a Connecticut state compliance audit. So we look at certain grants and do specific testing that is prescribed to us to do here. You have a comparable audit for a single audit for the federal funding when you have $750,000 of federal funds, either direct or passed through other agencies, like through OPM or SDE. You have a federal compliance audit. And then what you don't see is the Connecticut State Department of Education requires every Board of Ed or regional school district to have another set of procedures done because they all report upstream through an electronic reporting system into State Department of Ed for benchmarking and data gathering, and they have us do their own set of tests on that. And so that report actually goes to the superintendent and the State Department of Education. A lot of people don't realize of that extra component that we work on. So our highlights of the annual report. Everyone wants to know what's our fund balance. So on page 22, which is actually the second set of financial statements, we skipped over the first one. It's presented on a fund basis presentation. General fund balance was 10.3 million. It was up. You had revenues in excess of budget. You had cost savings in multiple departments. A portion of that is committed or assigned. We'll see that on the next page. One of the benchmarks for what is an adequate fund balance is set by the Government Finance Officers Association, and they say 2 months of your budgeted revenues is a good benchmark, which is 16.67% of your revenues. We did that comparison for you, and you're at 25%, so you're above that GFOA benchmark, and GFOA is not an auditor's group, that's an internal finance officers group. Also on page 22, you'd see all these columns for all these large funds you have. The ARPA money, which is temporarily a major fund, and then you'll be spending it down. At the end of June 23, they had 2.18 million left in grants. There's a column for the Hinsdale renovation project, because that was a pretty major activity in that year, and it's starting to be on the tail end as it started to wind down. That was waiting on Connecticut school construction money coming in at 1.7 million. Then I referenced page 24, which is still the fund financial statements, but instead of assets and liabilities, that's the revenues and expenses. You have the water and sewer capital improvement fund. A lot of activity in that fund because you had some borrowing there with the clean water drinking loan. And you also obviously spent it on capital expenditures. That activity's flowing through that fund, and then when the assets are purchased and completed, they're basically contributed into the water and sewer funds. You also, in your capital improvements fund, was very active because you had $11.5 million of bonds, and that was for both the Hinsdale borrowing and the road bond funding. So the next page is just a 3-year trend, the fund balance. It's most current is on the left, so it gets older as you go to the right. The most current one, 8.9 million unassigned, and then the yellow 1.4 million, that is committed by internal action, and that consists of the majority of it was committed for capital projects. It was an action done by board in the past, and you've been drawing it down. And then the remainder of that is the non-lapsing education fund, where there was a Board of Ed surplus in the budget, and the Board of Finance, or Board of Selectmen in this case, allowed that surplus to go into a non-lapsing fund to be used in future years. I'll continue with our highlights. After those fund statements I've been referencing is a set of statements for, in your case, water and sewer. It's for any fund that is supposed to be self-sustaining through user fees and revenues instead of grants and taxes. Sewer and water fund, the sewer used to have and had been getting money from Highland Lake assessments, and there was kind of a balance that was left there, shown as due from Highland Lake assessments, but the calculations weren't done correctly many years ago. So that old balance was taken care of this year. So the sewer used to have this asset saying it was gonna have this money coming from another fund. The decision was made, it's not gonna happen. So that was cleaned up in this year. After the water and sewer, you also have financial statements for the pension fund. Has $9 million in it. How much money it has in it is pretty irrelevant, because what you really care about is your funding percentage. We'll talk about that later. After those pension statements, we get into the footnotes. Page 45 happens to be a section showing your borrowing and payoff of debt. And that, again, references, you would see additions to debt, and it would be the new road fund and the Hinsdale borrowing of $11.5 million. Talk briefly about the teachers' retirement plan. This is more informational. You have no obligation to fund it. Every now and then, it's been quite a while now, the state says, oh, we're gonna start making the towns contribute a percentage. Haven't heard it lately, but for the teachers in Winchester, the town contributed $1.5 million this year. So it's kind of a measure of if you had to take it on, you'd be responsible for $1.5 million. The next page, I mentioned OPEB liability. That's post-employment benefits, which is health insurance. So there's also a state plan for the teachers for health insurance. It's a lot smaller. You can see that state only kicked in $25,000 for the Winchester teachers in the past year. After the notes, you start a new set of financial statements, and you have a detailed budget statement, which would be, this would be the first time in 69 pages that you would actually see a statement that looks familiar. And it's basically reporting back in the same format as your budget was adopted. So as I mentioned earlier, you had a surplus. Major contributors to that was tax collections were over budget. Investment income has finally bounced back. So I'm seeing people budgeting $25,000 for an interest, and then all of a sudden, when the rates go from 0.001% to 1%, you've just increased your return by 1,000-fold. So that happened during this time period in '23. And then you had positive expenditure variances in multiple departments, just about all of them probably. Then there's some schedules on pension plans. And I mentioned here your frozen defined benefit plan. That's where no new hires have been going into that plan. I talked about earlier, you don't care how much money's in it, you wanna know what percentage funding you're at. You're at 66%, which has been fairly level, and you could see that on these pages. There's a 10-year trend. The national average is low 70s, 73, 74, so you're a little low, higher than you were if you look back on that trend. And as the employees that were in that plan are aging, they're retiring, so your payouts are starting to increase, and your participating employees that are kicking in are decreasing. So for a while, at some point you may see that your town contributions have to increase. They haven't. If you look at, again, the 10-year trend, they've actually been going down. I think that's because of favorable stock markets, favorable investments. But the fear is that at some point there'll be no one paying in, you'll only be paying out, and you may not have enough money. New Hartford is a few years ahead of you on this in the process, and it's pretty level. They haven't really experienced this shocking increase in contributions. It's been holding its own, so hopefully that happens for you too. Then I mentioned here that any newer hires are all in defined contribution plans, so that's pay as you go. On page 87 is the schedule of tax collections from the tax collector's office, and you had $725,000 about outstanding at June 30. That is, we do some calculations and ratios. It's 2.85% of the current levy, so you've got about 3% of your tax bills are delinquent and outstanding, and that's all open years. That's a pretty good percentage. If you were up at 8%, 9, 10, we'd start to kind of look into that a little bit differently, but 3% is a good percentage. After that, I mentioned the two different grant compliance audits. So the federal single audit threshold $750,000. It's going up to $1 million, but you're still going to have it because you had $5.7 million of federal sourced funding. 1.2 was for water lines. 2.5 million was for Department of Education, or for the Board of Education for educational purposes. And if you look at the schedule of federal assistance that's in there, you'll see various COVID funding mixed in there, particularly with the Board of Education, because that's just the way they did their funding. They would have ESSER grants, but then they would do supplemental special education grants with ARPA money. I think we see that a lot with the state. They keep plugging holes with ARPA money until, you know, we think it'll go away after this cycle. It should tail off. You also see about I have it in the wrong paragraph. About 800,000 of ARPA money was spent. I put that in the state paragraph by accident. So looking at the state, you had almost $15 million of state-sourced grants. Largest one, 8.4, is ECS and excess costs for Board of Education, and then another 1.9 million in the school construction grant, again, education related, and then that 800,000 is actually a reference to the federal side. This next to last page, talk about findings. So this first sentence here, we say no findings reported in the schedules of findings and question cost in the federal and state single audits. That's where you would find your serious findings. So a lot of times people say, oh, where's our management letter? Well, in an audit that's done under government auditing standards, the serious stuff doesn't go in a management letter. It goes in the body of the reports. I'm happy to say you didn't have any findings in the body of your reports. But we have another audit with a very vocal taxpayer who keeps saying we do a terrible job because there's no management letter. And I wish I was there and I could say, just look inside your federal single audit report. You have a whole list of terrible findings. You know, so anyway, so that's the difference. When you're looking at on an audit for serious findings, they're in the report, not in a separate letter. Sometimes we do have a management letter. We actually issued more management letters than anyone else in the state of Connecticut last year. I But those are of lesser findings, lesser concern, lesser significance. We also have stuff in our file that we call verbal comments. People say, what did you find that you didn't tell us? Well, this year we discussed with the town that sometimes when you have encumbrances that are never filled and they're canceled, in historical practice here at the town has been you credit that to the current year's line item. So if you had a $100 line item and a $1 encumbrance from last year that was never filled, past practice has been to credit it to this year so you can actually spend $101. Because that negative $1 brings you down to 99. You get to spend the extra dollar. So we just had a verbal discussion about that. It was not a material amount, not significant. If it was, it would elevate through the management letter and then into the body of the report. The other thing that's not on here, but has been pretty significant lately, and we've been having discussions in our office among the staff, is that fraud is on the rise, and surprisingly, check fraud is on the rise. We have had more reports of check fraud in the past 3 months than we probably have in 2 years. In one case, a check was intercepted, and there's a lot of mail interception going on. They do it with tax returns as well. They intercepted the mail, grabbed the check, modified the check and put their name on it, and then submitted it for payment. $182,000 check. That organization had positive pay in place, so positive pay caught it. That's at the bank, and so they didn't have a problem. We have another one where someone intercepted a check and got the routing number and account number, and somehow was starting to make purchases online, direct ACHing through with online purchasing. I have another one where they found out that not check fraud, but somehow they got a W-2. Someone stole a W-2 or intercepted it in the mail, grabbed the tax ID number and the name and the address, started creating fake W-2s and submitting fake tax returns. Now, that doesn't take money out of your bank account, but you are now, part of a national fraud. The other one is ACHs. It was in the paper recently. Plymouth got hit with that. But they're not the only ones. I know Farmington got hit with that. And see, they're going after people that have sizable bank accounts. They're not going after citizens. They're going after organizations. And what they're doing is they're hijacking one of your vendors' emails. So in Farmington, it was I think it was Nickerson. They were building a sewer plant in Farmington, and Nickerson sent an email to purchasing and says, "Hey, we're changing our ACH instructions. Use this account number." And they fired it off because they were using Nickerson to build a sewer plant. So our internal discussions and our discussions we're starting to have with our clients is, we think any ACH instructions need to be verified with a phone call, because if you reply back with an email, that person's gonna say, "Yep, that's it." So, so then I did some searching around, and saw a few reports, and they showed the statistics that check fraud is up about 80%. So I think since 21, even though no one's writing checks anymore. If you're under 30, you don't own a checkbook. Maybe some of you don't own a checkbook. But big organizations are still writing a lot of checks. Problem is, if you switch to ACH, now you're in the ACH fraud. So it's just been a real concern. We're seeing a lot of it this year, and the reports I've looked at are supporting that there's a large increase. So, that's the end. That's all I have.
Any questions from the board?
Only question I had was back on the teacher's pension thing. Where the state put in
Page 56
yeah,
is the
1.5
reference.
million. What?
Yeah.
So they overfunded. Why would they overfund a pension? Because it was oh, excuse me.
No, it's not
That's not
that.
the one I'm looking at. Where was it?
There was one more on page 64, or yeah, the very next
In
page.
one of them, there was a difference in the contribution from the state and what was supposed to be in there. I forgot where it was.
Well, I may have mentioned the liability. The total liability, which is like a lifetime liability of 1.9 million. They only put in 25,000, that was the current cost of the plan.
Okay.
So that might be, so when I throw out what a pension liability is, that's not current, that's like a 30-year actuarial projected that they would pay out.
Okay, so it's not a yearly thing?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
Granted, they had underfunded historically, and more recently, they're putting a lot more money into it, but
Right.
I doubt they're caught up to your 66% yet.
No.
Well, it was about 5 or 6 years ago, the state had a brilliant plan that would have the towns pay the money into the teacher pension fund instead of the state, which would reduce the state budget, but kill all the towns.
Yeah. And that's when we started putting this in, is because people were saying, if we pick up 10%, what would we pick up? So, you know, on the other one with the 1.5 million annual cost, your Board of Ed share would be 150,000.
Right, and then the issue here, is it just the public school employees, or does it include the, the other half of our school system that's semi-private? So, that one I don't think was ever figured out.
Right.
If we ever had to pay, what would we have to pay?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Other questions?
So, the fund balance in here, so because this will impact our, when we go out, this spring, when we start on March 15th, with the budget that we get. So, you say that we now have, the unassigned fund balance is 88912. You said approximately 25% of the budgeted expenditures. So we've been trying never to go, close to the 16.7, because that's where we've been funding capital out of. So this number that you have here is important for us to know for this coming spring. Because we can't go below 16.7.
Well,
I mean, we can, but we're not supposed to.
It's a benchmark. I have had some discussion with some boards. Some boards have minimum fund balances. I honestly can't remember off the top of my head if you do.
Well, we have a policy but our policy was developed before the 16.7, so it's kind of on the low side.
So
And we
that's-
did that when we were recovering.
That's the GFOA, and there's another benchmark, Moody's and those guys, they actually say 12 to 15%. They're a little bit lower. So I tend to put one in for a few years and switch to the other.
Yeah.
People say, well, is our fund balance okay, or should it be higher, should it be lower? And I say, well, that's a management decision, and I say, well, especially in the very small towns, I say, and it was very timely, because I did this just before and just after Oxford, and I say, if you have 3 box culverts wash out, and you need to start bringing in Nickerson or whoever it is right away, you might be utilizing your fund balance, because you can't wait for FEMA to come in, you can't wait to borrow. And so the 3 box culverts in Winstead, or to exaggerate it, Colebrook or Norfolk, cost the same as it does in Torrington, but Torrington's got a much bigger fund balance. And so every now and then when we hear like in Oxford, people say, gee, we hate to really hover at the low range, because we're now having these incidents where we may have to just start spending money up front before waiting for reimbursement from FEMA or whatever.
Well, recently, we just took about, what did we take, about 800? 750 out of fund balance? For the boiler and for the software?
For the
Yeah.
for about
Yeah, software.
750, yeah.
And so we just, in this current year, we took it out.
Now, did you take that out of the million that you had set aside for capital projects?
No?
No.
I was taking out of fund balance.
Okay.
So the number that you have here, well, the good news is that for the past 3 years, it's been increasing, the uncommitted. So it's just something to pay attention to going forward. I mean, it's good news that everything went up, that
Right.
our savings account has gone up, because that's where you're able to take the money this year, so.
Just a quick, can you read, Selectman Perez, were you done?
Sure, go ahead.
Just a quick question, and I missed it when I looked at, towards the end, you talked about the outstanding taxes receivable balance, which was 2.85%, and you stated that it was all the years. Does that also include the years, and forgive me, I forgot the time frame, but every year, the
When you're
tax
rolled
collector, you know, basically says, they're not off the books, but we're gonna deem them as on. Does that also equate that number?
No, the suspense.
The suspense?
Yeah, that's a good question, because sometimes I feel like I see people manipulating the percentage. I see some places where they'll just transfer everything 1 year old to suspense. So that
Okay.
it keeps their, you know, percentage low. So we also look at that, and see
Okay.
what's going into suspense.
Okay. So the 285 does not include the suspense?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. I was pleased with the number.
But even if it did, generally because it's personal property, motor vehicle, and all your real estate is on the books,
Yeah.
it probably wouldn't budge
It's not
that
gonna tick it up.
percentage
Okay.
much.
That's all I had.
Anyone else?
Filling my head.
Thank you, Mr. King.
All right, thank you.
Now moving on to item number 6, town manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In no particular order, but one order that I do want to speak about first is obviously the incident that happened over this weekend with the loss of water. If you haven't brought up to speed, I'll go quickly. Sometime around Saturday afternoon, late in the afternoon, I started receiving phone calls that there was no water or the pressure was very low. Immediately, we sprung into action. We had crews on site, and I'll tell you what we originally thought is the system looked like it was working, and we were potentially hacked. And we were really, oh boy, now what do we do? And thoughts entered into my head of, okay, we do have cyber insurance, and fortunately, shortly after that, it was determined that the SCADA software, and if you're not familiar with SCADA, it's used in several communities throughout the entire country. It is a pretty fail-safe system, but with any computer, when you know airplanes don't fly, sometimes they go down. This particular glitch was 2 sensors that are actually in the tank were communicating that the water levels were full, but unfortunately the water levels were continuing to deplete. And it was on a Saturday, not that we ever have, you know, a person stationed inside the tank looking at the levels, but the ultimate issue was the glitch was telling us the tank was full, but unfortunately the tank was basically empty. We immediately brought SCADA in, we immediately got the system back online, we immediately obviously started filling the tank. Obviously, we couldn't push the water out because we needed to treat the water. We had SCADA representatives. We brought agents in from DPH, Department of Public Health. And then eventually, sometime later Sunday afternoon, we did get the clear by DPH. We try to get on top of it as quickly as possible with either Facebook posts and or on the town's website. I will tell you, later on in my report, we're going to talk about our website. But I can tell you, I had struggles with a lot of the information not being posted, being stuck in some queue under Civic Lift. And unfortunately, the website was a little behind what was getting posted on social media. Typically, what I did this weekend is once I updated one, I'd go to the other, and ended up seeing that our website was very delayed. In fact, some of my messages that were posted on Saturday weren't actually showing up until early Sunday morning. I do have a call into them as well, but it leads us down a path of, in situations like this, or a situation that's happening today with chip sealing on certain streets, and we needed to issue a parking ban. We try to do the best that we can in terms of social media, in terms of Facebook, in terms of website, sign it on the green, alerting people, you know, to go to the website and look for, you know, if your street's being affected by it. There are systems out there. I'm familiar with the Everbridge system. Everbridge is used in Torrington. And what it is, it's very similar to a reverse 911. It's a 211. Our residents will have to get in and actually sign up for the notifications. And once they do that, we have the ability to send out messages for pretty much anything. We can send out that there's a fireman's carnival, that particular roads, that there's a hazard in the area. We can geofence particular areas as well. So if we just want to alert certain areas of town that there may be construction or anything like that, we have the ability to do that. The state does buy us a very scaled down version of Everbridge. They allow us to unlock that Everbridge for catastrophic events. There's a meteor coming, there's, a horrific storm coming where loss of property and or life is imminent. The state will allow us to unlock the Everbridge. Unfortunately, it's a 211, so I don't have the statistics, but I know many towns haven't put a lot behind registering their particular residents for 211. I know the state does send out some messaging to try and get people registered on 211. But I wanted to throw that out there. I don't have any numbers. I can give you a rough ballpark. When I looked, at the town I was previously at, and we roughly have the same populations, it's about a $5,000 a year software. I'm more than willing to initiate some proposals, but I guess I wanted to throw it out to the Board of Selectmen for an initial, yeah, go get it, or no, you shouldn't even look into that software. Or if any of the selectmen had any ideas of how we can get information out quicker into more residents. Because one of the things I did see is that some residents are not on Facebook. Some residents don't have access to internet or knew about it. And it's simply put, it's a Saturday, it's a beautiful weekend. How many people are glued to their website, to their telephones, are looking up for this information? They're just simply out enjoying it. But one thing I know is that if you send a text message to somebody, they're instantaneously going to go look at it because they probably think it's a friend or a family member, but we benefit that, it's actually an alert that could tell them that, the water supply, boil water, all of that. I can continue with the report. We can pause. I was just looking to see if,
We definitely have to do something, because I had friends that had no idea that there was even anything that ever happens. So we have to definitely do something. I know the school does the reverse 911 call. Maybe we could have just used that as a temporary thing, but that's pretty important.
The schools is not reverse 911.
It's not, what do they have to?
No, the schools is,
Okay.
it hits every
Parents?
every parent and every staff member and stuff, but it's a paid system.
Same as
and
this.
You pay per student, and the school has access to it, but the school controls, and it's like hard work. I remember watching my secretary, you have to put in the parents' numbers all the
Yep,
time,
yep.
and they have to be correct, which is far better than what we have had. And we
Right.
have talked about these systems before, and we have talked about the costs of them. But
Yeah,
I'll
because
let him go, and then I have other
it's definitely
questions.
pretty important, because we have the firemen here, and we not only lost drinking water, more importantly, we lost fire protection, and that's not good. That's not good at all. How did they actually find out that, besides the phone calls, were they able to do a manual override to get those pumps pumping too?
Once we determined and we were able to figure out the glitch, we had SCADA on the phone. SCADA gave us a couple tricks to do to get the two sensors to start talking, to showing it. And once we did the override and went through a few procedures that SCADA gave us, we were able to start bringing water back into the tank.
Because I know this has been a problem throughout the country, as people getting hacked into water systems and messing things up, and we have to be protective. So there's definitely should be some type of safety procedure in there, not just the computers, but we need a manual override. Somebody to go in there and actually flick a switch or turn a valve or something. That's where I'm old school. I don't care for computers too much, so
A little redundancy.
it's the redundancy.
I happen to agree with you. Not that I like to spend money, but this would be money well spent. My phone rang off the hook all weekend. Most of the people that were calling me were more concerned with, they had already drinking the water. They found out about it later. So just that avenue to, let people know that you're not gonna have to go to the hospital and worry about it. And I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, the system is the old system. We are having a new system installed as we speak, and it has its own computer system. It's going to be the same computer system, but it's an upgraded system.
It's an upgraded system. So it's gonna be a little bit different, because now you're
So-
controlling the second tank up there, which actually
Correct.
looks great with the new tank,
and it think has to communicate with the tank up on Wallens Hill too.
Right, to
So-
equalize the pressure and the,
Keep that water flowing, that's the main
Right.
thing, is always keep that water moving.
So we're talking about communication to members of the town. Saturday night when this thing was happening, and I was watching it on social media. And first of all, there are members that sit on this board that jump on social media and give out information that may or may not be true. And I would respectfully ask everybody on this board, as you're getting information about things like this, is let the town communicate, not us, because we don't have all the facts. Paul had all the facts, we didn't have all the facts. And I suggest that the less confusing information we put out there, the better. Secondly, to be able to communicate about a water problem or any other, emergency for the town in a system like this really is the only efficient way to do it. I've lived in a community where we had it prior to moving to Winstead, and to get that information from a source that you could count on as being reliable and up to speed to the moment is where it should come from. So I think we need to investigate the cost of this, Paul. We need to communicate better to our residents. We hear that all the time. I don't know why we would even be debating whether or not we should at least entertain the cost of doing this and find an efficient and better way to communicate from one source, being you who know what's happening, as opposed to people in social media putting out what they think is happening, or even members of this board. So I think we definitely need to look at it.
so if you actually are, speaking of myself, who was on top of.
You were on it, Troy.
the
We knew that.
situation,
We knew you were on it.
and the information I got came from Paul, so.
But let
just
Paul
so you know.
communicate it. It's his job, not ours. The non-interference
He was
clause,
having
the
problems
non-interference
communicating.
clause requires us to let him do it, is all I'm saying.
He asked me to do it because he was having problems doing it.
I'd
So
like
there
to
you go.
shift the discussion, please, if we can. So, I think what this highlights for me is the fact that where was our emergency management team? Where was our emergency management plan? In town, in all towns, in all school systems, you have to have an emergency plan. And most emergency plans include just about everything that could happen in a town, or should include just about everything that happens in a town. So there should be checklists that say, if this happens, then you do this, this, and that. If this happens, then you do this, this, and that. So we have, I don't know if you all know this, it happened, and I'd like to know the cost of this, because we have an AM radio station. Did you all know that? It came online because the emergency management person put it online. It's a tiny little thing on our website, which, by the way, the website, I've been saying for over 2 years now, that we never should have gone to that company, and we should never have gone there. But that's besides the point. Well, it's not besides the point, it's an important point. But the emergency management system, where was it? This radio station, when it first came up through ARPA money, I was a proponent not to have it, because I said, when there's an emergency, what would happen? Is somebody gonna man it? If there's no remote access to it, why have it? Maybe you can get money from that. I don't know how much money it costs to set it up, but that could have been a system that, one of the arguments for that was for people that weren't on Facebook. But I'm more curious about, where's the emergency management plan on this? Because when the entire town goes down without water, if this was a school, everybody goes home. I mean, the buses start rolling, we all go home, everybody cheers.
Restaurants closed.
Everybody cheers.
Everybody has to go home.
Yeah,
No
like
bathrooms, no
Right.
water,
Right.
no
So-
nothing.
But, in schools, kids cheer, we're going home, okay? But this was to the level of a townwide, in my mind, it's kind of like that, when we had that August hurricane. Remember, nobody had the communications then, and that was what, 4 years ago? Time escapes me. But it was the same thing. So and I don't think the emergency manager was involved. Were they?
They weren't.
They
Nope.
weren't. So, so that's the thing, is when we talk about communication, what has to be done and who has to be done, and that's why things slip through the cracks, is because we don't have, that's why airline pilots use checklists, right? That's why there's book checklists. So I would like to see what the emergency management handbook has. I know there's just one written copy that maybe you could make available, so we could all come in and, look at it. But that's where all that, when you do your postmortem with your staff, I hope that you're looking at that part too.
What was the purpose of the AM radio station?
Well, right now, it's, I went and listened to it. It reaches up to where I am at the end of Highland Lake. It reaches up on top of that hill, but loses it when you head down onto Route 8 there. Well, it was talking about scams and frauds, et cetera, but I believe it was for civil preparedness, for emergencies. I mean, it's great that when there's not an emergency that it's running beneficial information, but it hasn't been, it's there for this purpose, but.
Who runs it? Who feeds it the information?
The Emergency Management Director of the town of Winchester.
So a question, and I am bringing,
heard about it.
Steve and I are meeting.
I know, and I only know about it because it came as a request through ARPA, and the board didn't approve it, and then it came on besides that afterwards. But that shouldn't be the only system, right? So you have, obviously, social media helps with the right information. The website helps with the right information, right? But, I mean, websites are hard, you also have to, when people are uploading the information, they have to have contact, a cell signal, and all those years ago, that's when the cell batteries were stolen out of the towers. Now they got it blocked up, but that's why things failed here, because you couldn't, I couldn't put it up on social media or on the website because I didn't have a cell signal. We gotta drive sometimes to do that. So there should be all these redundancies in this emergency management plan of, whether you have the radio or not the radio. I mean, you could have called into Channel 3 or Channel NBC like a snowstorm, right? Because they would have put it. ZBG was on its weekend hours, so it wouldn't have run it. But all of our other emergency, things could have, they weren't enacted, I don't believe, but they could have been enacted with this checklist, like a winter snowstorm kind of thing. So I guess that's more of, getting that other system is great, is good. I mean, Torrington uses it. They tell us when our taxes are due.
I lived in a shoreline community during Superstorm Sandy,
Yeah.
and we had that system that you're referring to, and I signed up for it, and we were getting alerts when to evacuate, what the requirements were, and I would be willing to bet there's more cell phones in homes today than an AM radio. I'd be really hard pressed to find a way to receive an AM radio in my house at
How
this
much my
point.
car?
Did you have something? Did you have your hand up earlier?
Well, no, just as a member of the Board of Selectmen, I had no notice of this at all, as a member, and I was annoyed, I must say, because neighbors were asking what was wrong. Until I went to Facebook to find out what was wrong, I had no answer. So I would appreciate in the future, when something like that happens, to let all members of the board know.
Yeah, I'll take the criticism, definitely. I guess I tend to push it out there, but I think you guys are ones that maybe not glued to Facebook either. So I'll send,
Yeah,
under
I'd
situations.
appreciate that.
I'll just, because we want to make sure we don't get into a quote-unquote meeting. If I push an email out, please don't reply all, because now you're engaged into a meeting outside of the public purview. But I have absolutely,
Yes.
Zero issues. I know a few select people emailed me over the weekend. I responded back. I guess just one question on the AM station, because that fascinates me a little bit. And Steve Williams is coming in. People have to tune into it, though, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a radio, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but I guess I probably would have spoke against it when it was being proposed, because you would have to, and I would assume probably 99% of our population probably isn't listening to AM radio, or that. So, I find that, and I can't wait to talk to Mr. Williams either Wednesday or Thursday morning, because I'd have to alert him to listen to the AM station, because these people, they're out enjoying the day, everything like that. I don't know if they're listening to 1620, because I now remember the number in my head because it was told to me. So I'm interested to dive deep into the AM station and find out.
Right, but we have we have on the website, emergency management,
Yep.
right? So if you go through here, I mean, that's what emergency management is, and, here's where it says where you're gonna get the information, and you're gonna listen to radio stations, and 96.5 FM, and United Way, and this is what I'm talking about, reviewing our emergency management plan, because, let's say, well, one, you would have had to declare this event a townwide emergency. And I don't know that anybody in the line thought of it as that, because it wasn't freezing January. Oh, by the way, if freezing January comes, I really worry about our preparedness. When we had Snowtober and other things like that, we were lucky because it was warm. Sandy, everything was warm. But in the middle of freezing January, I would be completely worried about things. So I guess in the assessment of this situation that happened, was there an assessment that it was a townwide emergency? Because I just knew about it because somebody down the street that actually has water up there said, we don't have any water pressure, me and my neighbors, right? So the first thing you think about is, some pipe burst in the ground. But then it became clear that it became a wider, more comprehensive, everywhere thing. And everybody got on it, and you figured that, okay, we solved it, the water's coming back on, we just have to wait a little bit. But where in that line of thinking did anybody ever go off to, this is an emergency, let's enact the system, let's do all that? And I guess that's where these plans and stuff, it would be good to, with everybody, with, having all the, I don't know if you have you guys would know, internal emergency management meetings every, 6 months, or review every 6 months, but like
Safety
schools do.
meetings every quarter. We
Yeah,
have safety
schools
meetings
do
every
that.
quarter.
Schools do that. Schools come down here and meet with the chief of police and everybody and have emergency things, in case you have to evacuate and all that kind of stuff. So does the town, you're newer, but not newer anymore. So, are these meetings being held, to review things? I mean, you're gonna have one, you said you would, so I imagine you will. But review all these things.
So, Paul, I think, I talked with Steve a little bit when he was doing the AM thing. I think the thought behind that was, so say we have what'd you call it, Snowtober?
Yeah.
We had the big snowstorm, right? We lost power everywhere for a long time. One thing, I think Steve's point was, it was an AM radio with a generator up there, right? If power's out, say statewide, we're not broadcasting FM, AM, at least our residents, he can reach with that AM radio.
Correct.
Do people know how to tune in? Maybe anybody under the age of 35, 40 doesn't even know what an AM radio is. Even in Winchester Center, where I am, Winchester Center is funny because, like, maybe you catch it up by the Grange, then you lose it. I happen to be in a little dip, but the elevation of my house, I can pick up that station. I have picked up that station. I don't think it was a primary alert system, but it's a true state of emergency. I think that along with ham, right? We have ham and, the town has a good ham setup in a true emergency. I think that was the thoughts behind that, of maintaining that station. But I really think we need to look into maybe the 211 system.
So I think also what we've talked about here in the last 20 minutes is, I'd love to know more about our emergencies preparedness plan and what's in the book for different types of emergencies. Not necessarily to make changes, but so at least we're up to speed on it. So when this happens and the phone rings and we have to answer people's questions, I think, to Linda's point, we should know when something happens, that you can send out a message to all of us. And we should know what the plans are, and I think certainly look into the system, because most people today, I may have an AM radio laying around, but I'd have a hard time finding it. And if the power's out, I mean, I have a generator, but not everybody does. But these they keep them charged. They'll find a way to get messages on here, and it's the most efficient way we have to send out messages from the town to our residents. So let's get the information on that. I think it's important.
We'll have it.
Absolutely, and sorry I have to kind of do this. I'd been asking the Public Works Director probably for a few months, even before I came on this board, that even if there's a water main break or a sewer break, that he should notify the board to let them know, because I was getting calls way before even this, and I was away this weekend, so everybody
everybody did have to just be patient and let the guys do their job, do what they had to do. But we definitely needed something as far as emergency management.
Yeah, I
So
agree.
I'm-
I think
I'm
we
definitely-
should all be
we
notified of
definitely need to do something.
anything like that.
Because that's the biggest thing. Our own selectmen didn't even know. That's not really
Yeah,
acceptable.
I got calls too as well, Paul, but up where I am, I have a well, I have a septic for a reason.
I mean, we luckily
So
got
I
out
had
of
no clue
this.
there was no water.
Yes.
We luckily got out of this, because if it was a contaminated water situation and people didn't know and drank the water or bathed in the water or gave it to their baby or whatever, so we have to take this serious. So I do believe we have to come up with something immediately.
You gotta shore up the plan.
We will.
Back to your.
And then finally, on this particular subject, publicly, I do want to thank our crew that worked tirelessly, Saturday afternoon, late Saturday evening, and into Sunday morning to get us back and running. So I publicly want to thank the crew, Victor, and everybody. They just did some awesome work. Their communication with me, so we could update the residents, was just simply great, and publicly I wanted to thank them. So moving on, again, in no particular order, as you were aware, and publicly I announced it, I know I sent everybody an email, I believe it was last week. Jamie Legassi has officially accepted the fire marshal position and will be starting soon. The position garnered significant interest from applicants all across the country, which demonstrated the attractiveness of our community. It was great to see that, we had Jamie might not be at, but we had a full gamut of applicants that put their name in the hat. Ultimately, Jamie won out, and currently the fire chief position is officially posted on all of the different websites that are available to us as well. Moving on.
Before you move on to that, could you just explain to everybody how the fire chief gets hired?
So the fire chief gets hired. The volunteers at the fire station actually select the particular candidate that they want. They bring it forward to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen then appoints that particular candidate to the fire chief's position. The town manager's office is actually, per charter, removed from that particular situation. We are taking the applications in, and then we'll funnel them over to the fire department. Great question. So you all get to decide, ultimately.
Well, we don't decide. The fire department.
Fire department decides, and then you ultimately appoint.
Yes.
So, moving on, as I talked about, and a select woman mentioned as well, our website is absolutely antiquated, and I met with Mintz and Hoke. It's a website development company / marketing company. I met one of the representatives up at the Highland Lake annual meeting. She had been wanting to meet with me. She has a vested interest in providing a new website for the town as well. We had our initial meeting. We're looking to schedule our next meeting of ideas that are floating in my head and their head of unlocking the full potential of our website and really engaging our residents. The police union negotiations and meetings, they are ongoing. So far, things are starting to improve a little bit at a time. We do have some challenges down there, but we're continuing to work on a weekly basis with the union and management, sitting down at the table and airing out any issues that may be forming, just so we can address them head on before we have an explosion and we have morale down at the lowest levels. As mentioned at a previous selectmen's meeting, we went back to Gilbert about the ASO contract, Armed Security Officer. Meeting with our town attorney, he had some concerns about the liability on the town's part. Gilbert has just recently sent back a revised version of the ACO contract. The chief and I have to sit down and go over it. So we are still, in talks with Gilbert about them ultimately bringing on an ASO, but you all, as promised at a selectmen's meeting, would give me the authorization to sign this ASO contract. So as soon as we have a better draft version, I'll send it out to everybody to get your concerns as well. If we have to add anything before we bring it to a full vote. Just so you know, in Gilbert's budget that was recently approved, they do have a line item in the budget to fund this ASO officer. Open government software. I know Jeff talked about it when I was away, about the enforcement software. I brought open government in. They gave me an additional sales pitch of how this isn't gonna really cost us any money. I negotiated with them, we reduced the quote that they originally gave us, it's still up there. They just recently sent over a few towns for references that have utilized this software. I've started the calls, but typically it is a little bit of a stretch to get first selectmen's, mayors, and town managers to call back the same day that you called, but I do want to get their take on the enforcement software. I'll note that the enforcement software is a great tool, but how quick do we turn the dial is the question. Sure, maybe it could cover the cost of it because you're turning the dial up, but at what expense? So Jeff and I are continuing to meet about it. I do like the software, but again, it's how quick are we turning the dial? Moving on, we did have a very informal, small little work group about transportation cost savings. We saw that Northwest Transit went from a very nominal bill to over $75,000 a year. Just looking to see, can we revise the routes? Is there other options that we have? Again, we just had one meeting. Just wanted to put it on your radar that we understand that it's a $75,000+ ask. Can we get a little bit more for the money that we're giving every single year? Nothing really to report back other than put it on your radar that, you know, we're just having talks and seeing where we can go and possibly get, you know, our dollars that we spend every year to be used better. Main Street planning, we met with 272 Main Street. We hosted a bunch of folks, including their entire board, about potential uses for that space. One of the biggest issues that seems to be focusing around 272 Main Street is parking, and one that came up, and I agree with it, but waste removal, in that there's no back exit out of that building to get to the dumpster. So any type of waste removal would need to be brought around the building. I gotta get into that building. I think that's something that we can overcome, but,
Could you tell us what building that is?
oh, 272 is the old IGA. The health center.
Right up here.
Right up there, sorry.
So they had that issue down at Second Home during planning and zoning, the waste removal.
Okay.
They might want to check with them.
I gotta look at that. Okay, let me look at that. I attended the 52nd anniversary of our senior center luncheon over at the golf course. The first time I got to go up to that golf course. Beautiful golf course, by the way. So I do want to get out there and swing if I ever have time. And I really just want to say the luncheon was packed with seniors. They all drove there. Jen didn't have to offer any buses, and these seniors had smiles on their face. She does just a wonderful job over at the senior center, and you can just tell by, you know, the way the seniors interact there and with her at that event. Okay, now we got to get serious. Assessors update. The grand list is still being worked on. There's still many questions about how cars are being taxed. I'm going to just put it all out there because I think we need to start talking about it now. The grand list will show little to no growth, if not negative growth. And if you remember, that grand list is coming up in October. Now I'm going to hit some other items. Is, you know that the state law did pass. There's a new veterans fully disabled tax credit. That's going to cost the town roughly about $45,000 a year. That's as it stands right now. If more and more veterans get the disability, that number's only going to go up. But right now we're looking at about a $45,000 loss in what we currently get. The new way they're assessing cars is really going to hurt the town. It's about a $200,000 loss. If you're not familiar with the bill that was passed down at the state, the new bill has us taxing 85% of the MSRP, dropping 5% a year until it reaches 50%, then we take our 70% of that value. So that alone is going to net us about a $200,000 loss in revenue. If all things stay the same, just the way that the new law was passed on how cars are being assessed, it's a $200,000 loss. On a positive front, TMA is off and running, and audits are going to start being performed by the end of the week, I'm being told. Moving on, we had a COG meeting, a lot of back and forth. really a lot of items were related to brownfield grants that we moved forward. 10 Bridge Street development. I don't know if you had heard, but 10 Bridge Street is back on the market. Just tried several attempts to talk with the individual that was looking at purchasing that particular property. Has not responded to either calls or voicemails yet. The development, though, does present a new opportunity for the town, which is exciting. I did send it out to a few of the developers that I've worked with in the past to at least get eyes on it. I did talk to one of the select people. They had given me an idea that I wasn't even thinking about. That's why it's important to talk to each and every one of you, because one, you've been here longer than I have, and you have great ideas that possibly you tear down the front portion of the building, which will give you parking. Parking seems to be a lot which kicked back on the initial impression to those developers, but I've reached back out to them and shared an idea with them. So 10 Bridge Street, if you're out there talking about the town, we have a great property that could be developed and could give us potentially some condos or some nice apartments. Moving on, I did meet with Eric over at the marina. I think it was the end of last week. He's looking to expand his business, but his plans from several years ago have shrunk after now 7 years in business. He's not ready to take on the world, but he is looking to potentially expand the marina. I told him that he definitely obviously has to go to the Planning and Zoning Commission to start bringing those ideas forward. And last, but I think not least, is school boiler. I got to provide a correction from my last meeting. When I spoke with the business manager over at the BOE, when I asked how the boilers were doing, she stated that the boilers were in. In my eyes was different than in her eyes, meaning in to her was they were in town. I thought in meant that they were installed. So the boilers officially have been delivered, placed on their platforms. The installation work is ongoing. The contractor will be on site this week and next, and I got this last week, so they were here last week and now this week. Pipe fabrication is underway with fuel piping complete and water piping in progress. New pumps are scheduled to arrive on October 6th and the exhaust vent on October 15th. The existing pumps and temporary vent can be used as needed in the interim. The door to the air shaft will also be replaced as part of the project. In the future, I'm gonna get more detailed information. If I hear something is in, I'll say, well, does that just mean in town or does that mean installed? So I do apologize that I misled the board at my last meeting. I will definitely work to get more information in terms of what exactly does that all entail and get more timelines. That's all I have, and open it up to
Comments, questions?
I have a question.
yes. Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
I think last time we spoke about the ASO versus SRO, we had pretty limited staffing in the police department. Now that we've gotten back up towards a full complement, I realize we have a few in the academy and we're not there yet. We're still 8-10 months away from being there, but are we willing to revisit this school resource officer as opposed to this armed security guard?
So, two things. First one being, it looks great right now, but fortunately, we are going to be promoting 2 of our officers into sergeant, which now creates 2 more vacancies in our officers department. So we're not full. I know 2 weeks ago I said we were fully staffed, but now with the promotions, we're gonna now need an additional 2 new officers down in our officer rank. As far as the SRO goes, speaking with the chief, an SRO all in is roughly $137,000 a year. I know Gilbert has budgeted $50,000 a year for this ASO officer, only working 8 months of the year. So you're looking at 50,000 versus 137 in Gilbert. I don't believe we can place an SRO in there. They would have to come to us. As far as our schools go, we would need to talk to the Board of Ed and see, if they want an SRO or, they have not approached me for an SRO or an ASO for that matter. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess if we were fully staffed, would we have the manpower to do an SRO?
We would need to bring on another officer.
So we'd have, in addition to being fully staffed, you'd need to have a specific person.
Yeah, and, the chief and I have been talking, is the complement of 20 officers the right complement for this town? Several years ago, it was in the vicinity of 25 to 26 officers, so we're under the staffing that we were several years ago. And then obviously if you subtract one out, now you're leaving the rest of the town vulnerable while you're protecting the schools. That's not a bad thing, but I would probably suggest if you wanted an SRO in schools, that you would actually have to fund an SRO position and keep your officers the same. Now, you do get a little bit of benefit when school's not in session, but there is summer school. That particular officer during the months of July and August, I'll pick the easier months, could possibly pick up, you know, some overtime jobs that are out there, that officer could potentially get injected into the schedule to save on overtime.
Yeah, this has been discussed, and it comes down, well, personnel. But it comes down, unfortunately, to the amount of money that there is. Because whether the police officer's here or up there, it costs the town, it's tax dollars. It's funded through the budget. And their budget is our budget. You know, it's all, I mean, they're all in, it's in 3 different areas, but it all comes down to the same taxpayer there. So if you do an SRO up there, and one of the things that I would be adamant about is if we're funding, you know, officers, that K-6 also have opportunities for officers. I think that, you know, this whole thing across the country now with all these hoaxes, I mean, just locally, the other day said somebody brought a gun to school. True, not true, we don't know who, you know, we don't know where it's all coming from. So there's all these people that are out there with things. I mean, I know what it's like to be in a school where you had an officer there. I know it helps administration a great deal. But again, I mean, everything we just heard, you know, $245,000 less. And then we go up 137 times 2. You know, I mean, that's where, you know, the hard part is, right?
We're gonna, and the reason, Selectwoman Perez brought it up, and she wanted an assessor's update, so it's not, but we need to seriously look at those numbers. And as we look, and as we've stated, we already have about $750,000 earmarked out of our general fund for the boiler project, for the software for the police department. I don't really have many more things up my sleeve in terms of how I can juice the revenue. I'm preparing you for, we're gonna have tough conversations when we get in the budget mode, because simply put, the revenue isn't looking peachy right now. We're gonna work, but I think it's important to get it on your radars of the asks next year. It's going to be a maintenance budget because we simply, and that's gonna be a stretch. The new asks are going to be hard. And how do we fund it? I mean, we saw we had to go through 3 budget referendums this year. We had what was it, just under 3% taxing? What was the just under 3%, and that was hard to get through. We did pass it, so I needed to get this on everybody's radar, that we're gonna have some challenges next year.
My question really was, if we had a full complement, with scheduling, without adding the expense of another officer, could we get 1 day shift officer as a school resource officer without hiring a security guard, without potentially adding to the police force? Is it possible from a scheduling standpoint, right? I think there's an advantage to an SRO. I think they develop a relationship with the kids from a police perspective, and I think that's a benefit. But mostly it was about, from a budget standpoint, if we're fully complemented and it's day shift only, can we rotate or schedule 1 person there?
Just so you know, and you're probably not aware of this, SROs have special training, so you'd have to train every officer to be an SRO. They have to go to a class to be an SRO. It's not a lengthy class, but if you're looking to rotate that particular
Rotate.
officer out,
Anyway, from a scheduling perspective, is it possible? That's all I was
probably the
asking.
simple answer was
Well-
no.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, but to Paul's point, to Paul's, I'll use plural Paul's
Plural.
point.
Paulie.
Paul
I mean,
squared.
You know, an SRO in the school, you know, does different things than a police officer that goes there just to be a presence, right? So, Paul, if you were talking about a day shift person just to be a presence in the parking lot, on the perimeters, you know, to just be outside, that's one thing. To be an SRO and dealing with students, dealing with administration, that's the other trained part, so.
I love the SRO part.
Yeah,
I
know,
love
we
the
all wanna-
relationship they develop with the kids, and, you know, the kids get to learn about policing and that
Right,
it's, you
and
know,
it would be good to have, yes, it would be, but, you know.
So
when-
when do you win the lottery?
I will.
and write a big check to-
yeah. So I want to shift gears because you brought it up,
Okay?
if I may. I was going to wait until later on. I would like about a little over a year ago, a little bit longer, I don't remember which month it was. We asked the town planner and at the time economic development director to come in and talk about the Route 800 corridor. They talked about the south end of town, but they didn't really remember there was a north end of town on that. So I'd like to know what progress has been made with the town planning office on the economic discussions on the route, well, I guess we call it Rowley Street and North Main Street efforts. I know that there's discussion about one of the, what is it, off of, that runs parallel with it, that, you know, they've been digging in the banks and stuff back there, and we keep hearing that maybe something's gonna happen, maybe something's gonna happen. But in light of all of this revenue issues and whatnot, where is the planning office's, you know, general, you know, overlay of a plan, like, this is what we're looking at for over here, this is what we'd like to get here. These are the businesses that we've contacted to expand, you know, because we have some of the manufacturing that's on the northern end, North Main Street end. Has the planning office gone in to talk to them at all about that? I know economic development, you know, periodically talks to all the businesses and whatnot, but, you know, our paid staff, you know, what kind of work has been done over the past year, a year and a half? And then, you know, what's the plan on, you know, Main Street from that office in terms of economic development? Not like, not let's go out and count the trees, but, you know, what are the business plans? What are, you know, because we're not getting out of this hole without some
Massive
businesses
economic
here. It's not happening. And that this budget's gonna point it out again.
Excellent question. For planning purposes, and I know y'all wanted Mr. Rollins here. Unfortunately, he had another commitment tonight. He will be coming to our October 7th meeting. Would you like, so we have roads coming October 7th.
Yeah.
Would you also, and I don't mind.
Well, you said Mr. Rollins, but I think I'm talking about the planner.
No, oh yeah, no, so I was talking, so Mr. Rollins is coming, I was just planning out next meeting. Mr. Rollins is set to come in on October 7th. I can do the planner as well, I could do planner and roads.
Well, if the planner has a document readily available, it'd be nice to have it on October 7th. If there's not a document available, then I guess we'd have to wait for some sort of sketch.
We'll get it done for
some
October
sort.
7th. I don't like to wait. I think we'll have-
And last but not least, I'm gonna go back to the boilers at Pearson. I sent a request letter, I believe to you, that you forwarded to the Board of Education with a list of verifications and clarifications. Not just an update that everything's going good and everything will be up soon, but there were some verifications I wanted, and I've got zero response. So whoever the powers be that are in charge of that project, I would really like to get an answer to that letter if we could pass along the sense of urgency.
I can do that, Mr. Pozo. Just so you're aware, when I forwarded that letter, the response back was what I had put in my manager's report, just a scaled down version. So I have written down
Yeah, I put
some
a
answers.
specific list of requests. I'd like specific individual answers to those requests if I could
Not a problem.
so impose.
Anything else?
I have nothing, Mr. Mayor.
All right, moving on to item number 7, Finance Director's Report.
Good evening. The following are the general fund results through August 31st of 2024. We are 2 months into the fiscal year, which is 17%. Current year-to-date revenues, property taxes, $10,514,173, which is 38.45% of our budget. That is in comparison to $14,079,065 for the same period last year, which was 52.97%. Past due tax collections, $72,701, 12.12% of the budget, compared to $83,500, which was 27.83% for last year. Total year-to-date revenues, $11,004,676, 26.97% of the budget. That's in comparison to $14,872,153, which was 38% of the budget. Total year-to-date expenditures, $6,028,149, 18.76% of the budget, compared to $6,043,722 for the same period last year, which was 22.25%. Municipal aid received in the month of August. We received the DOT grant for reimbursement for a portion of the van for the DDS program of $119,224. The water department received the $750,000 from DEEP for the payment for an easement for conservation lands in the town. And then we received a $9,085 grant for aging and disability for the senior services, which I think was for the roof and an additional program. Cash flow as of July 31st, we do not have completed cash flow as of August 31st, so don't be alarmed. It was $9,541,545 at July 31st. Of that, $7,093,677 was invested. $451,000 was in the Northwest Community Bank sweep, $2,451,000 at Stiff, and $4,190,000 in Northwest Community Bank money market. August 2004 capital expenditures, we paid out $79,102 for Smith Hill Culvert, $8,013 for Highland Lake storm drains, $14,044 for annual road maintenance, $8,168 for Hannafin Road bond project, $106,363 for Hubbard Street bond, and $127,848 for the senior center van, which is partially grant funded also from the Connecticut DOT of $115,048. We also have Elm Street, which is ongoing, in which we have payment requests that are currently being processed. That's why you don't show any of that as being expended currently. Questions?
Yeah, can you repeat that Highland Lake drainage or whatever you?
$8,013.
Anne Marie, are you anticipating the tax revenue to be lower due to the tax bills being sent out later? Is that happening?
I would assume so, yeah. They might be a little slower. They might be a little slower coming in, yes.
I was gonna note, you saw about a $4 million difference between what we collected last year versus this year. It's because of when the tax bills were due and going to 3 budget referendums. So I think that's important for the community to hear as well.
Yeah.
Mostly based because the bills were due later.
So just a couple comments to kind of piggyback on what Chris had mentioned with the 2023 audit. 24 is pretty much closed right now, other than now we're moving into audit season and getting the audit rolling. We just received our planning list, so we have planned when the auditors will be coming out to do their work. So we are pretty much at the very tail end of paying any invoices for fiscal 24, except for 1 or 2 on our capitals. So our general fund payments are done now. And all of our open POs for fiscal 24 have been closed. So there will be no more spending against 2024's results.
Other questions from board? Candy?
Yeah, I had asked, and I had mentioned at the last meeting about a projection for, remember we met and I asked
For
about.
fund balance?
Oh, just, not the fund balance projection, but just projections in general, remember my little paper?
A 5-year?
Well, not 5-year, just what the projections are going forward. We used to,
Projections for just the fiscal year 24 projections, yeah, no, I have not gotten a chance to even start working on that. That
yeah,
is
it
on
doesn't
my
have to
list.
be a 5-year, it just has to, what's the projection, we know what We know what the contracts are, we know what the raises are, we know kind of all that
Yeah,
stuff. kinda
that's gonna be a project to put that together and to work on that, so, yeah, I have that on my list to do. I have also done, and I know that we met, previously, I have rolled forward the balances with projected general fund balances based on 2024, based on what was budgeted in the 2025 budget of the $2 million for capitals, the Pearson project, the Next Gen project, and where we expect to be, where we should expect to be going into the budget season for next year, and then considering what is already committed in the budget going forward for items such as purchases that we have pre-bought that will need to be funded in the fund. So I have done that analysis and, have a pretty good idea of where I think we will land. And after even looking at our commitments, you're still hovering around almost 20% in your general fund unassigned balance.
Selectman Hester, do you have something?
No, I don't.
Any other questions?
I had a statement that I just also wanted to put on the board's radar during this financial report. If you looked at the audit, roughly $2.2 million of ARPA money was unspent as of the close of the 23. I have been, what's a good way to say it, Selectman Hester? Diligently,
Thank you.
with our department heads to spend that money.
Doggedly.
Or I will be in front of this board because we have until the end of this calendar year, December 31st, 2024, to allocate and PO in the system, or we have to turn the money back to the federal government. Obviously, I would think this entire board's goal is that we wouldn't be turning back any particular money. I have been stressing to these department heads, there will become a time in November where I will have no other choice but to go before this Board of Selectmen, reallocate that money, and race to get a PO in the system. We're simply why would we turn back any of that ARPA money to the federal government?
Right, so you have a list of the ARPA projects,
We do.
and you could give us a list of which ones have been completed and which ones have not, right?
We can do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That'll answer the question as to which ones are out there.
Yes. We can. Yeah, we just looked at it. I know Selectman Hester and I were, a bulk of our money is water and sewer. And,
I didn't want to say that out.
oh, sorry, I will, because maybe they'll help me in this meeting, because I've only sent
I couldn't stress it enough.
a few
At the last
emails and
meeting.
conversations, so, it's a serious subject, because why would any town wanna turn back any type
No.
of federal money to Washington? So, it's on the radar here. I hope I don't have to come before you in November, but I also don't wanna have to turn back money, so.
I'm sure people can spend it for you.
Yes, they can.
And just a couple comments on what Chris brought up about the increasing level of fraud taking place in banking. We do have positive pay in place with our bank, with Bank of America. We do on an ongoing basis get things that are kicked back almost on a daily basis of people attempting to pass checks, attempting to use our account number, attempting to potentially process an ACH. We do not ACH any payments to vendors, just so all of you know. We do not wire payments to vendors. If that request ever came in via email, as it has in other towns, I know that it has to some other departments, and it gets stopped, and people know better than to think that that is a valid way to send in a request for payment, particularly on the construction application for payments. In my department, we require a wet signature. So I would never take an email to pay any of those large contractor payments. They have to contain the Director of Public Works' wet signature for us to pay them. They then pass through my desk, and I put a cover page on them with the work that I have to do, and they have my wet signature on them that then goes to our accounts payable department to be paid. So there is a significant level of controls over there within my department, with Treasury, and I'll tell you, if I ever put a request in to wire money, Cindy would stop it immediately. No one person can wire money out the door. It takes two people, and Cindy typically is the person who is the stopgap of moving money from investment accounts into the checking account in order to pay the bills.
Does that include the Board of Ed?
She moves the money for the Board of Ed check runs, yes. Yep. because our signatures are, Cindy and my signature are on the Board of Ed checks. So all of the Board of Ed check runs run through mine and Cindy's desks.
But does the Board of Ed employ the same system you do with the
Well,
WIS?
they don't pay, they're not allowed to wire money. They don't have access to wire money or ACH money. We don't allow any vendors to directly ACH withdrawal from our accounts, even for credits, let's say with OpenGov. If we have to, if someone gets a building permit, they want a building permit refund, we pay it via check because we do not want them to have that ability to directly draw ACH. The only ACHs that come out of our accounts, if there are any, would be through the payroll system, and those are initiated by us.
Anne Marie and I talk often, if not daily, about
Yes.
different emails that may come in. We know other towns were hit. We've had enough. We're not going down that road. So we talk maybe 2 times a day, sometimes about.
I can tell you lots.
Yeah. So we take fraud seriously, and we don't need it in this town. Nope.
Thank you, Anne Marie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 8, correspondence. Does anyone on the board have anything? Moving on to item 9, unfinished business. A, 24-07, resolution endorsing Vision Zero to eliminate roadway fatalities and serious injuries in the town of Winchester by 2034.
So if you remember 2 weeks ago, this was a resolution we had before all of you. You all had particular questions that what is this Vision Zero? Don't know if you had a chance to look at the 2-page write-up explaining exactly what Vision Zero is. I'll summarize probably in the best paragraph is Vision Zero can be compared to Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MAD, in the same way that MAD seeks to educate and change the public perception of drunk driving as an acceptable practice and safety concern. Vision Zero seeks to change the way the entities approach design, construct, and manage roadways to achieve zero roadway fatalities and injuries. Again, this is just looking at their practices and seeing if those practices should be deployed as we go through this Safe Street grant. Not saying that we're going to employ them, but we would look at Vision Zero as the standard of how to keep our streets safe. We would look at some of the practices that they have incorporated around the country or around the world, and deciding if it applies to this particular street or we have our own particular ideas of what we may or may not use.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Bill. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Paul. Any discussion?
Yes, last time we met, this was brought up. I asked if you could get us an account of how many fatal accidents or serious injuries occurred in this town, and we don't have that information.
Linda, I apologize. When I went back to my notes, I didn't write that down, so I will get it and I'll email it out immediately once I have it. We won't have to wait.
Just, I'm curious, and where these occurred. I mean, are we talking about Main Street? Are we talking about Colony Drive? Are we talking about North Main Street? What are we talking about here with this Safe Streets?
So the Safe Street grant is for the entire town. When the town applied for the grant, it's to look at all of our streets and come up with a comprehensive plan on all of our streets.
Okay, because we have so many fatalities and serious injuries?
I wasn't here when the grant was applied for, but it's a way of unlocking potential federal and state money that if, the report comes back that we have an unsafe street, this report will now help us to unlock some of the federal or state money available. If it's a completely safe street, the feds in the state are gonna say, well, why are you asking us for money? You go, pave it or do whatever you want. This is a way of proving to federal and state agencies of, hey, we have a very unsafe street. We need to unlock some of your money immediately so we can fix these streets.
So is it 44 that we're focusing on?
The entire town.
The entire town, okay.
Yeah.
So I think I can't make a decision until I find out how many fatalities we've had in town and how many serious accidents. And in the resolution as well, the first resolution, you had mentioned a $50,000 match. And when I read your two-page analysis of the grant, it said that there wouldn't, that 50,000 would go toward signs, different resources that we would need to correct these problems. So I guess it's not in the second resolution that you designed.
So there are two resolutions. One of them passed at the last selectmen's meeting. The resolution that passed was to go out and get the Safe Streets grant with the $50,000 match from the town, so a total of $250,000 to get the report to now start studying our streets. The resolution tonight in front of us is to potentially use Vision Zero as the way that we're going to be looking at these streets as we start to look and plan out what we want to do to our streets that do come back as unsafe streets.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So without this being implemented, let's see if I can word this different. This is a precursor to fix Main Street. We need this to go to the state for funding to redesign Main Street.
I want to be careful, because when the town applied for the Safe Street grant, Main Street was listed, but it also listed all the other streets in Winstead as well. So I want to be very careful in that we stay true to the grant application that we put in, that we will be looking at multiple streets throughout town.
So Paul, if I understood the conversation that we had, so this stretches from border to border, the entire town of Winchester. If they're up off Danbury Quarter Road, they could be up on the Norfolk line. They determine one curve is unsafe, could have the potential for accident. This covers, they're gonna do a survey of every single intersection road in the town to determine the level.
We're gonna look at multiple streets that we feel are unsafe.
Are we feeling safe, or they're gonna do a survey of all the
There,
streets?
there's data that backs into, say, you look at a street that may have 5 houses on it. That's not obviously gonna be on the radar, but we're gonna look at highly trafficked streets and start studying those to determine if they're safe or unsafe. This report comes back that say, hey, we should use some of Vision Zero's, philosophies to make, and this is why we can make the street safer. It allows us to then write a much better grant application to the feds or the state, and using Vision Zero as our hey, they've, worldwide recognition that, if we employ these practices, we can make this street so much safer.
But we provide the data for that study.
Correct.
Vision Zero provides the data.
Well, Vision Zero gives us the,
They analyze the data.
They analyze the data, we provide the data, correct?
correct, we provide the data, yes. And they say, hey, you should put I'm gonna make something up. You should put a raised crosswalk here with lights on the road. This we found in many different countries or states works and reduces potentially pedestrian deaths. Okay, that sounds like a good idea. We could, I could see the grant application based on our findings, based on Vision Zero's, ideas. They've proven that when we've raised crosswalks and put lights in the road, they've reduced, pedestrian deaths down to 0. State or federal agencies, wow, they had 10, they're claiming using Vision Zero, they could go to 0. We should unlock, the potential grant for this town to allow them to make the street safer.
Back about, I want to say, I'm looking for it now, but I can't find it. We had a similar study done over on Bridge Street.
Okay.
That intersection up there, when Steve Sadowski was the planner. There was a committee that looked at that. In that study is all the data that Linda is seeking from that period of time. You can also get the traffic counts and the traffic accidents from DOT on that. But if you find, I'm trying to find it here. I can't. Is, I guess, I don't know what happened to all our stuff that was there, but it's not there. So, but somewhere here in the planning office, there should be a document in town of that project for Bridge and there's a Prospect and Willow, that where they all come together. And there'll be a lot of data, then you'll know what to get from a DOT.
Thank you, appreciate it, but you don't have the date, huh? That's okay, I'll
I think
find it.
2016
You
-ish.
think 16? Okay.
Yeah, somewhere in there, it's, you have to. 17, 18, 16, 18.
I'll start at 14 and go up.
Yeah, it should
Makes it
be,
late.
it should be a document somewhere.
It's fine.
All right, we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor? Opposed? 5-2. Motion passes. Moving on to item B, update Soldiers Monument Commission. Deborah and Lynn Kessler.
Good evening. I know this is a break in the type of meeting we've had so far this evening, so. Recently, the Soldiers Monument Commission was talking about the fact that we weren't sure that all of you really know what we do on the commission. And Lynn and I met with Paul Harrington, and he invited us to be on the meeting agenda tonight so we could tell you what we do at the Soldiers Monument Commission. And I wanted to start by sharing our mission statement with you. The commission recognizes the historical importance and aesthetic value of the Soldiers Monument, the symbolic icon of the town of Winchester. Our mission is to protect, preserve, and enhance this nationally recognized landmark while providing a clean and safe park for all residents and visitors. So we would like to bring you up to date on what we see as our responsibilities towards the monument, what our various activities are, and show you how we use public history programming to enhance the visibility of not only our beautiful monument, but of our community as a whole.
Well, our first point is to protect the integrity of the monument itself, to make sure that it's still standing in another 150 years. So to that end, we determined years ago that we had to have the monument repointed because stones are separated and be potentially falling apart. We had that done, and we had it done in accordance with the historic ways of maintaining a structure like that, which is really like a church. So we hired a fellow who had done repointing on several churches throughout the Northeast, New York State, and other places. And my opinion is he did a fantastic job with that. We next moved on to replacing the rotted out wooden windows that were there with cladded windows in the appropriate colors. We installed a storage shed in the back right so that we could clear out a lot of things we had stored in the monument that we used for maintaining the grounds, just hoses and tools, and allowed us to keep the interior fit for the presence of visitors, so we can open it up at any time we want to without having to worry about moving a bag of cement. So we also planted what's called a Victorian perennial garden. Now, Victorian gardens were very ornate, but they were planned ornate. They were planned so that they would blossom at particular times of the year, so that when one died down, the other would blossom with some more color then. So it would stay beautiful throughout the entire growing season. We have also determined that there will be upcoming projects that we need to address as well. So we need to remove the gravel that's around the apron of the monument and replace it with pavers. That's going to be coming down the road here. It's going to be a long project coming because it will be quite expensive as we will be able to determine. But we also don't know what we really want to look like, so we're going to be exploring avenues there. If you remember, there were two cannon up there on pintles. And the pintles were falling apart. decided that we were going to replace the mounts, the pintles, but not with more pintles, but with appropriate Civil War cannon carriages. There are only a couple or three manufacturers of cannon carriages in the United States, two of whom are rather difficult to get hold of. One is that I was able to get hold of, produces carriages for the National Park Service. He makes them out of the marine grade aluminum that's used on underwater drilling platforms. So they withstand weather tremendously. And the mounts that are in the national monument places, national parks, places like that, those cannon mounts, they're going to last for centuries if maintained properly. So we also found that these cannons were rather unique in themselves. They are Civil War era cannons, but we didn't know what they were. They were mounted upside down on pintles so that the manufacturer stamps were obscured. We wouldn't know what they were until we got them off, so we took them off to store them, cleaned them up. We found that they are rare Confederate Fawcett Preston and Company cannons manufactured in Liverpool that the Confederates used, rather on a limited basis, because the problem with the Fawcett Preston cannons is that the ammunition had to be manufactured specifically for each cannon. So imagine the problem that you would run into if you wanted to pass ammunition around, and I gave you a clip for my rifle, and I put it in yours, and hey, is it gonna blow up? We don't know. So, when the war was over, all these cannons that we had captured ended up in armories throughout the existing United States. And over the decades, they were just sitting there in the mud, muzzle down usually, not being used. And they had absolutely no use except as boat anchors, since by then, the 1880s, you now had the Bessemer steel process, which produced steel that would have a tensile strength to allow a projectile to be shot from miles rather than just hundreds of yards. So the U.S. government came up with what they called the Disused Cannon Act. And this allowed any civic organization to apply to receive cannons to display in front of their town halls or cemeteries, their town parks or whatever, no charge. So we were able to receive these two cannons. Now, you didn't have a choice what cannons you were going to get. They just went to the armies and said, okay, they want two, send these two. So they picked them out of the mud, and this is what we got. We were fortunate enough to get these two, the Fawcett Preston cannons, because they're like the last two left that were ever shipped to the United States for the Confederate use. I talked to a professor at the University of North Carolina. He was just thrilled not to find out that these cannons were there. So, again, they were inappropriately mounted, so we're going to have the carriages made for them. We're waiting for a town grant, or a grant to come through the Tom Huschel Road through the U.S. government. That's a matching grant. So we have 50% matching funds, so we have half the money for that. We actually couldn't have all the money for the cannons if we wanted to spend that for the carriages. But we'd rather not spend all the money if you don't have to. We'd rather just spend half. But it takes a while, as you know, to get grants to happen. And that's the point that we're at now.
So, over the past 15 years, the commission has introduced a lot of public history programs. And many of these programs are recurring, and some of them are, one and done. So, of the recurring events that the commission is responsible for, I'll begin with Memorial Day. The Soldiers Monument Commission plans and organizes the ceremony that occurs in East End Park at the conclusion of our Memorial Day Parade. And that includes inviting guest speakers, local clergy, town dignitaries. We've incorporated a public reading of all the names of the people who've died from Winstead, Winchester since the Revolutionary War forward. And part of that whole process is we incorporate the scouts to go out and put a flag down for each name. The commission also ensures that there are flowers that day placed at every war memorial throughout town. And additionally, the monument is always open for tours. We've begun to do programming for Juneteenth. This was our second year that this is a national holiday, And this year, we had a first-person presentation by Kevin Johnson from the State Library, portraying a true Black Civil War soldier from Connecticut, and his experiences. And he actually, that regiment was in Texas when Juneteenth occurred, so talking about his experiences. On the 4th of July, Independence Day, we are open for tours, but we also have a shared public reading of the Declaration of Independence, which is an absolute thrill to have the opportunity to stand up in front of other members of the community and to participate in the reading of that document. September 11th. This is our third year that we did a September 11th program. So obviously we're remembering the events of 9/11, 2001, but we're also commemorating on that day, the day that the Soldiers Monument was dedicated in 1890. And it's an interesting, combination of reasons to come together. So this was our third annual concert that we've done. This year, the concert was performed by the Farmington Valley Band, and we would be remiss not to thank Northwestern Community Bank for supporting and underwriting the event. And I just want to thank Candy. It was very nice to see her. She came out to support the event. This is, I don't know how many years now that we've been doing a historic cemetery walk. And each year, we pick a different cemetery in town. We rotate around. We work in conjunction with the Beardsley Library's Genealogy and History Room to research the people who are buried there. And we provide guided historic tours in these cemeteries. And the tours, people get very excited about it. They'll come up to us in the grocery store and say, "Are you doing it again this year?" They really like it. But it brings history to life for people and gives them insight and understanding into what this community is all about. And it's not just the founders, although we do talk about some of the big names in this town's history, but also the everyday people and what they encountered. And just a point of note, this year's tour will be Saturday, October 19th at the Old Burying Ground. We're going to start this year at noon, and the rain date is that Sunday. Our last, open day of the year is Veterans Day, where we again are open for tours. And we have actually a public reading of the Gettysburg Address, which was first read by President Lincoln on November 19th, 1863 in Gettysburg. And given that our monument was built by Civil War veterans, that it commemorates Civil War dead, that it's a very appropriate and fitting reading for that day.
We've also decided to create a series of events that are not just focused in the warmer months, but can be run year-round. And not necessarily about the monument itself, but it's sponsored by the monument. And having to do with history of Windsor or Connecticut. And just keep the interest generated in the town itself. So we had our first winter lecture series this year in January, February, and March at the Beardsley Library. We had three speakers. One was Hamish Lutrish. He's a professor at Connecticut Central University, I think, or someplace. Yeah, he does profess. Also Todd Bryden, who is a professor at the community college here in town. And I myself gave a lecture on the 169th Infantry, which is a regiment that's in Connecticut in World War II, from which the town of Winston provided the boys in Company E for that regiment to fight in the Pacific War. The series is going to be happening again next year, January, February, and March. We don't know who's going to be speaking other than Hamish.
Hamish is speaking in January.
We haven't decided on the other two, but it's always held in those Beardsley Library on Saturday around 11 o'clock or so, and it's free of charge to the public.
The third Saturday of each of those months.
Third Saturday, yes. And we have hosted other individual programs. We did the 25th anniversary of the Soldiers Monument, which is a 3-day event, and it included programs at the cemetery regarding the Civil War monuments that are, the soldiers' gravesite monuments that are there. We had a visit from Abraham Lincoln, a rededication ceremony at the monument, and it was culminated by a grand Civil War ball at the end. We've held a ragtime era ball. We had a World War II living history and vehicle show a few years back, which included the history about the monument's role in World War II and the Cold War as an observation point.
Which is that sign. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of what that sign is. That sign was on the grounds of the monument during World War II. The photograph of it is over here under that picture of the monument. It was an official U.S. Army outpost, and it remained so through the Cold War. I'm sorry, I didn't change that.
Tell us your way. So, and at the end of that, we had a World War II swing dance, which was the best turnout we've ever had for a dance. It was quite a party.
So, we just wanted to spend a few minutes with you to tell you what we're all about. Hope that you see the value that this commission brings to the community as a whole, and, come out and see us.
Yeah, give us more money so we can have more events like this.
Thank you both for your dedication to the monument and the whole commission and to this town for all the work that you guys are doing. And they are running alongside the Historic Commission. It's almost the same
Yeah.
group of people, so
Yeah, of the Historic Commission.
And,
So
and
it's-
thank you, Bill, for being,
thank you guys.
our mentor there. So, thank you.
Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, I'll just remind you, because it's come, but you do have some unspent ARPA money too. So
Yes, we know.
I saw some
Thank you.
projects,
Yes,
so,
yes, we know.
it's gonna be a drum I'm gonna be beating for several weeks. So, yeah, you'll hear more. So, thank you.
And for new members of the board, if you haven't seen the drone footage video, it's amazing.
It is amazing.
Moving on to item C, 24-42, refunds as recommended by the Collector of Revenues.
Mr. Mayor, as you see, that's attached in your packet, we have refunds totaling $2,640.92.
Do we have a motion?
I move that the Board of Selectmen authorize the refunds recommended by the Collector of Revenue in the amount of $2,640.92.
Second.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Bill. Discussion? All in favor? Unanimous? Moving on to item D, proposed ordinance regarding volunteer fire EMS incentives.
So before we begin this conversation, I did spend some time reading the charter. I'm still familiarizing myself and learning more and more every day. The word proposed ordinance is actually probably misstated. This is a, lack of a better term, temperature check, because if it was a proposed ordinance, it would need to appear on the website. We would have to have 3 meetings. If you all want to continue down the path, great. Then we would begin the 3 meetings in 2 weeks on our website. So just note that this isn't necessarily the proposed ordinance until I felt it better that you all should be proposing the ordinances, and then we can take the official path if you decide to go with it. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to, who do we want it? The fire chief slash interim fire marshal?
Check.
So,
Once a chief, always a chief.
yeah.
So do you have any ARPA money left over for us?
Stop, just
Okay,
stop.
just figured I'd start with that. So as you see, this proposed, there was a committee that was formed between the 3 volunteer agencies, Winston Fire, Winchester Fire, and Winston Ambulance, and we started this back in 2021. Excuse me. And this has been kicked around and put in people's plates for a few times, and now we're finally at that point. So it's a proposed ordinance. You could call it really anything that it needs to be. It's trying to retain our volunteers. As we know, since the 80s, volunteer fire and ambulance services has been declining, and it keeps going down. As you know, you just spent $200,000 to help staff ambulances. We're hoping that this will retain our volunteers and, for longer times. A few years ago, I found the National Volunteer Fire Council put out that the average volunteer stays for 3.5 years. So that's looking at some of our members, we've had members that have been here for 5, 10, 15, 20, 40 years, and then we do have that revolving amount of members as well. So we're hoping that, with a tax abatement program, it will encourage people to stay in town, to purchase homes in town, and to keep volunteering. So the costs, just a quick, because I know That's always a question. What is it gonna cost us? So I ran some numbers today, which would be for the last fiscal year, so it was, July 1 of 2023 to June 30th of '24. And the total between the three volunteer organizations was $32,000. It's a very low number compared to really money that you spent on the ambulance this year. And if you have to start staffing fire department personnel as the decline keeps going, I mean, you can be talking, I did a quick math of, 3 people, 24 hours a day is gonna cost you about $1.5 million annually. And with 3 people, you're still not gonna staff a fire, so you still need volunteers. So no matter what the future plan is, and you will need to hire more firefighters as time goes on. I'm not the first chief to come to the Board of Selectmen and state that. But we still need our volunteers no matter what. So this is a very low number, and as I've spoken in the past, if it's $32,000 this year, if you're lucky, next year it'll be $50,000. Because that means we have more volunteers that are spending more time volunteering.
I'll add to, thank you, Chief. I'll add that it's active volunteers. If you look at the criteria, it's not just simply, I'm a volunteer in Winchester or Winchester. There is points that get assigned to certain criterias that they have to meet. So, for an example, 35 points, they would need to attend 35 regular or special meetings if they just wanted to do that. Or, it's a combination of drills or dispatched emergency calls. So it's not simply volunteer and get a tax abatement, it's volunteer and actually serve. So we've put criteria behind in order to unlock the potential of these tax abatements, keeping in mind that these tax abatements are only on real estate tax. It's not on a motor vehicle, it's not on any personal property, but it is on a volunteer who actually owns a home here in Winchester that they would be able to maximum get $2,000. When the chief and I sat down to speak, we looked at the state statute. The state statute back a few years ago went up to $2,000. The chief threw the number that, Paul, our typical volunteer lasts 3.5 years. I go, excellent. We'll say after 5 years, you can unlock the double bonus of $2,000. So in the beginning, and it's not an all or nothing, as you can see, the minimum requirement is to achieve 35 points, which would unlock a $250 abatement, and you'd have to go all the way up to 80 points, which is pretty much a real active volunteer. We hope everybody would get 80 points because then we know we're fully staffed and everybody's trained well. That would qualify for the $1,000 abatement. The minimum of 60 points of those have to be on emergency crew calls, which is important that when that tone goes off, we have crews going out to where we desperately need them to, either an accident or a fire. And then again, after the 5th year of continuous service, that's the ability where you would take the $250 credit and potentially turn it into $500. You're just doubling it for any member that has over 5 years of service.
And we tried to use it so that the calls matter, we need to do training, we need to do meetings, but we also need fire, emergency calls, and whether it be the ambulance. And you can see, it was 60 points for the full tax abatement, 60 minimum points of emergency calls. And with the ambulance, it was per shift. So on-call crew is a 6-hour shift, gets 1 point. Second crew, so that what we were talking about when there's the first crew is out and or the second crew, members that show up and volunteer will get 1 point for that. So it was well thought out by the committee of, so we're not just giving away taxpayer money.
Paul, do you need a motion for this?
I don't think we're there yet. What I was looking for tonight is a temperature on this, and then we would start going down the road of the 3 meetings in 2 weeks online. And this is why, because it seems like there will be discussion, so before we heavily publicize it, Mr. Mayor, I'll let you go around the horseshoe.
It's been almost a year since we talked about this,
Exactly.
and you came ready with a number I was gonna ask you about. But how about what's the maximum exposure, let's say everybody were to get it?
Well, let look at the list, because like we stated, a lot of people, a lot of our members have cars, but they don't own property. So most of the people I'm looking, let me just quickly look down the list, that either people do not live in town, or they're younger, so unless they purchase a home.
Just a disclaimer too, because some people thought I was against it way back.
No, I
I'm
never
not
took,
for
you
or
always ask
against it.
questions.
I'm just asking the financial questions that.
Full disclosure, as the chief and I talked, I said that Candy would be asking the question, so come in with your number, because that will be the first
I
question.
asked them these last year too, and some people decided to say that I was against it, but I'm not, so.
So for the 2 fire departments, I could see 3 more people could get the full,
Okay.
so it'd be $6,000 more. I can't voice for the ambulance. I think that, you know, their numbers are fairly close.
Because this is the first time that we would be crediting ambulance for things, yes?
No,
Or-
they get the old
Or they get
pension
the call?
program.
Yeah, okay, so, and that's my other question. So is the pension or the per calls still going to continue, and this is on top of that, or in place of?
So we currently have paper call, which that would stay. And then the pension, we don't do anymore. That, the paper call replaced that. And the ambulance still does, in low numbers, the paper call. I'm sorry, the pension program.
So this is on top of that?
Yes, no, and I can't speak, I'm pointing backwards,
Yeah,
because
no,
Jeff
he's-
is
he's
there.
right there, yeah.
There's, I think they only get like $250. So the old pension program, so everyone knows, was designed back, you know, probably 30 years ago. And for the fire department got 250 as a firefighter and 500 as an officer if you made certain points. 30 years ago, those numbers started, and they never went up. And the ambulance is the same way, I think.
Yeah, it is. I'm Jeff Liskin. I'm currently the treasurer of Winston Ambulance. I've been a member of both departments actually for 23 years, but tonight I'm representing Winston Ambulance. Our other board members and officers could not be here. So I can answer questions directly related to the ambulance, if necessary.
What do you get for, what is the ambulance, do you know what the ambulance gets for the pension?
Yeah, so we determine whether our members have met their requirements to be what we call a member in good standing, and if they've done all of their time, they've made enough meetings without being unexcused, then we ask that the town contributes $250 for the entire year for that one individual member. If you're an officer in an organization, we ask that the town contributes an additional $250. We have not gone up on our ask on that number for several years, so we've kept that number relatively low. I think it's around $6,000 a year in total. There was something else I was gonna say, but I don't remember what that was. Maybe if you ask another question, it'll come back to me.
Oh, it's just what would the maximum exposure be?
So the
He
number I
said-
gave, sure, so the number I gave the chief this afternoon was the maximum exposure. I think I gave him 8,000, I recalculated, we misunderstood one line item, so it's actually really a maximum right now today of 9,000. But I can tell you in reality, it would probably be lower than that. That would be your maximum exposure, because I took a list of about 20 or so members, and I eliminated all the people that don't live in town. And I eliminated all the people that are not in active status. And then I pared it right down to the people that would actually be potentially eligible, and I came up with about 7 people, maybe 7 or 8 people. And from there, when I run the numbers to see if everybody's actually hit the point status, it doesn't come close. So maximum exposure, if everybody did everything they were supposed to do from Winston Ambulance, it's $9,000, or for this purposes, it's $8,000 out of 32. Just from the ambulance, the rest is, different.
I think it's a small gesture for the hundreds of hours that these guys gotta put in for training and going to calls. I was a member for 10 years myself, so I know exactly what it entails, so, I think the town should be more than willing to do this. And I will vote yes for this.
Bill?
So, I think this is extremely important for future recruitment and for retention. I think this is a great program. I know Winchester Center, they struggle to struggle up there for members like crazy up in the sticks. But I'm gonna be the guy that's gonna ask the one question that people have already read the agenda are gonna ask me. The responder point system, dispatched emergency calls. Are these assists as well if little Timmy hits a squirrel in his car, calls Litchfield County Dispatch saying, I think I put a hole in my mother's radiator. He calls and dispatches the ladder truck, I told you about the incident in Torrington, right? Rescue showed up, ladder truck showed up, bumper showed up, and I had a guy lose his brake line in my parking lot. But
It's
because
all
we had that
calls,
down thing.
every call.
So every single call counts the point system.
So believe it or not, pagers made lazy firefighters. So years ago, when we used to just have the horns in Winston and, you know, sirens, and we didn't have pagers, you'd hear the horns, you'd hear the siren, you wouldn't know what the call was.
Right.
Now, when you hear those minor calls, sometimes they're really not minor, they wind up being larger, but people listen to that and go, I'm not gonna be bothered to leave my job, I'm not gonna stop doing. So it's all dispatch incidents, but we don't really have people, you know, listen that, you know, I mean, we have a lot of calls. We have, since we've taken on assisting the ambulance with medical calls, we do about 730 calls a year. So 60 calls is what you would be required to get this number. You could call that, you know, 10%. I don't like using percentages because some calls could happen in the daytime when people are working. Sometimes they're overnight. So percentages are a bad way to look at things. What we did is we looked at the amount of volunteers, we looked at how many calls people go to, and say, what is a reasonable number? And that's how we came down to that. And then all three organizations agreed that that was a reasonable number. Now, Winchester, I was talking with Chief Marchand earlier today, and he's like, you know, there's not too many people in Winchester because that will get the full amount because they only get dispatched about 75 calls a year. So again, they knew this going in, but still said, this is what we propose. So I think it's a reasonable number to ask for this amount.
And say, Chief, so first of all, echoing Selectman Lemire's comments, I think your recognition is great for the people to come out and volunteer for this, and we desperately need more people to come out. So I also support this. Question I have for you is how many can hit the 80? Is it possible? Is it hard for them to hit the 80 points, or can the average volunteer firefighter or ambulance person do enough, attend enough to actually get to the 80?
I'm just looking at the list, I'm listening. Yeah. The majority of our people make easily the calls. You know, I'm looking at the active people. So, you know, on the list, we have people that are more active than others. The active people make those 60 calls. I mean, I can go down the list and see 93, 85, you know, I'm hitting the high ones. How about 340 calls? He's sitting back there.
Thank you,
know,
by the way.
So, you know, we have a large chunk of them. The ones that the dollar amount that I figured out was, I've got pink and blue colors on my paper. So the pink ones get the full amount, and then blue get partial. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, some of the people don't own property. So they make those numbers, but they're not gonna get the benefit.
I love the idea of people that don't own property who will be encouraged to live in town as a volunteer and take advantage of this program. So you guys have reviewed the point structure. If you think that that is the point structure that works and is fair for both the members and the town, I love this idea.
I think it's important if this select group gets questions that state statute prohibits this abatement from going on personal property and motor vehicles. So I don't want you to get questioned on the street or an email of, well, you disadvantaged me because, you know, I'm 21 years old and I live in an apartment, but I'm a great volunteer. State statute actually defines it as just a real estate tax. In fact, the chief and he goes, oh, wait a minute, I got to redo something because I had read the statute. So just so you're prepared that if you do get asked that question of why are you only doing it on real estate, it's because that's what statute allows us to do, or only allows us to do.
Yeah. So when you come back, whichever one of you is coming back with this, please detail the cost of this. What what you think it is gonna be and what the maximum is, because I'm gonna tell you, you're gonna sit here at the budget next year, in April. And those of you that didn't wanna vote for the first budget that we had last year, this money's gonna be in there. This $32,000, $50,000 request, along with the money that we already have in there, is going to be a new amount on top of everything that we all just talked about here tonight. So when the budget comes forward next year, it's great to do this at this time of year. We all support it. We all supported all the raises last year too, the $500,000. We all supported the $240,000 for ambulance, but we couldn't get two budgets across the line. So one of the reasons we want to have all this information up front is that everybody can talk about it in enough, enough time that the community understands that when there's an increase in the taxes next year, that this is part of it because it's important. So the translation between this conversation and support has to translate next April. And if it doesn't, then we're gonna be faced in the same place where we were before. So
So that's where I think communication is key, right? We need to let the taxpayers know that this is really important, because if these guys can pick up 5 or 10 homeowners, right, that are willing to volunteer their time and make these calls, that prevents us from hiring 1 or 2 full-time firefighters, which is gonna cost them a whole lot more.
I mean, I think I had a proposal or a thought that you should pay the new people coming in for their training a stipend of $3,000 to train, because it takes up the weekends, it takes up nights, it takes up a lot of time. There should be more stipends. But again, it's all nice to say it right here, but when you sit here next April and we go to put the budget out, and if you say no, then this is one of the issues that will happen, is that this money, if we're gonna keep the programs, and once we install it, the money's going to have to come from somewhere. And we already know with the cars were down, we already know with other things that are down, so just remember supporting it.
This is somewhat defensive in nature though, too, Candy, because if we don't do something to encourage people to come out and do this, we saw it happen with the ambulance. Ambulance cost us $200,000 because we couldn't get people to volunteer.
Yeah.
So this is somewhat defensive, encourage people to volunteer so that we're not faced with hiring full-time.
Right, and not to be a doubter over here, but that pension plan, the per calls, it was the same language.
And
It
it
was-
definitely is.
It was the same language, so that we don't have to hire, so we get more volunteers. And our numbers are here because it's just difficult to volunteer today with the amount of time. And the fire and ambulance, the amount of training that you all have to do on a regular basis makes it difficult for people to be part of it. So, I mean, you may wanna just expand it, not just on what you get for answering calls, but what are we doing in the training department to at least help people? Let's say somebody wants to be a firefighter or EMT. You gotta go out on weekends, but I work at Home Depot and make, an extra couple $100 for my family on these weekends. So maybe if you had a stipend, maybe they could go to training, maybe it would help them in terms of being able to step up like that. And I know that people that just got finished training might be upset that they didn't get training money, or people may say, I didn't get it. But, if you're gonna stave off another shift, and if you're gonna do that, I think the expanse isn't just around here, but about getting in the door.
Right, I agree. And, I did an estimate on 5,200 houses. I mean, you could do it by person, you can do it but the $32,000 is about $6 per household. If you took that 200,000, if you had 5,200 household, the 200,000 you gave the ambulance was $38 per household. To fund a 3-person fire department, I did 1.44. Was $276 per household. So, just to put in perspective some numbers of what
Right,
cost is.
it all makes sense until you get to May 30th.
And try to sell it.
I fully understand. I was
and-
with you not up there, but.
And then on the way to May 30th, there wasn't, I mean, I know, you all know what happened, so.
Yep.
I'm just saying that this is where, you're gonna, the issues, this is where you, making decisions that are going to impact
The future.
decisions that you make in April.
So I have a question on this for the ambulance. Did you guys just not offer a program this year and or last year
where you were willing to pay for the EMT training? I thought I saw a flyer said, yeah. you
Well,
would-
we just ran a course, yeah. Yeah, we only got one member out of that course. Yeah, we ran our course, we ran our own course. It actually cost us, some money. There was some costs involved, is what I'm trying to say. And,
Right.
we were hoping to get more members out of it, but we only got one member out of that class.
Jamie, for certification for firemen, firefighter 1 and firefighter 2, how many hours is that?
So firefighter 1 is about 240 hours, and then firefighter 2 probably pushes 100, just over that.
So like 350. Jeff, EMT is 300?
I don't know if it's that high. I know it's more. When I took it, it was 120. But it's I don't know. Ben might even know. Yeah, I think it's 150 at least. That's just to get your EMT, and then for us, it's a long orientation and training process because obviously there's a lot involved with EMS. But on top of that, what we also deal with is every 2 years, 2-3 years, you gotta do at least 40 hours of continuing education. I've done that several times now after 23 years, so it's just ongoing.
So you have 1 point here for training. Drills, training session, 1 point, right?
Correct.
So, someone coming on, how many training sessions do they need to go to be certified?
Well, if you took 204, so firefighter 1, for instance, is about 4.5 months of 2 nights a week and every other weekend.
So every night that they attend is at 1 point?
Well, we don't really document it that way, but yes, it would be. But if you look, the minimum, you have the fire calls that you have to make. So they could easily get the points for the training out of the firefighter 1 or firefighter 2, or any class they really take. It's, they have to do the calls to actually get that tax abatement.
Ah, I see, right. So they can't just.
So it wouldn't just be.
But they
you
do get
money.
some credit here for attending all this training.
Correct.
So who calculates, monitors the points?
That would be the chief.
The chief, and does anyone monitor your calculations to see if they're correct?
More than willing to show them to you.
No, it's okay.
Nobody monitors mine, but it's all.
Yeah, I mean, this thing's kind of weird.
got
I figured that question would come
Okay.
up, right? And we, at the ambulance, we have all this technology, right? And so everything would be readily available. If we ever presented a points to you and you wanted to see them,
Okay.
I could show you the spreadsheets, I could show you the reports we pull right out of our scheduling system and the system that we use to track our, like when we have to do our patient care run reports. That's where we get some of the numbers on how many calls we've each done, so I'd be happy to share that open book.
Yeah, it's really, everything is documented and it's a click and print.
You must maintain records on calls of who attends, just for.
Absolutely.
I imagine for insurance and every other
Well,
reason
for
you need to know,
insurance,
right?
for grants,
Yeah.
all the fire calls that we do, we have to track those, and we have how many people, and we have very detailed
I imagine.
records.
We're gonna budget money for King and King next year for the fire department.
Yeah.
Do a thorough investigation.
Oh, I was like, sorry, Kat, I was wondering where we were going. I apologize. I'm like, what?
They'll
What?
probably cost more than the tax
Okay.
abatement.
So to summarize, it would seem that there's an appetite for this to become a official proposal at the next meeting?
Well, we'd have to go 3 meetings, and then it would appear on.
Started at the next meeting.
Started at the next meeting. We'll come back with maximum exposure. We'll, I think there's a
For
way we
today,
can
I mean-
remove some of the names. We can, just as firefighter, we can give maximum exposure, but we'll start the clock, it sounds like, and dive a little bit more into this at our October 7th meeting.
Just let me know what you need for that. Let me just check and make sure I'm not on vacation that week.
I didn't sign
I'm
it.
back.
Um,
And I don't know if you need me here or not, but.
I think it's maximum exposure of, how many firefighters do you have? Roughly.
There's 35, I think.
And
on
that's,
this.
and that's not,
But again, when they don't own property in town, we have to minus all those off. Some of them do not live in town, so we minus those off.
but
number
the
that I have-
maximum would be if, let's say I was 24 years old, I have the potential to buy, currently live
Correct.
at mom and dad's house, maybe I'm about to buy a house. That exposure would need to be accounted for because that's an individual that potentially could unlock $1,000. And I think that's what's like.
And how many more possible members In other words, do you have a maximum count you would accept
We
for
don't have a
volunteers?
maximum count, but I could be wrong in this statement, I hope I am, but people aren't gonna beat down the door. We do pay-per-call, you know, you could make more money than what we're offering for a tax abatement by going to calls, and people aren't beating down the door to come in, so.
Got it.
You know, it's very, very difficult to answer your question of how many people we think this is gonna get versus, you know, what it's gonna cost. I think the exposure level is a very difficult target. You know, we could look at the list here and say, let's do a percentage of how many of our younger members will buy a home in the town of Winchester and, you know, do it that way. But I think it's a very difficult way to say, how many people do you think you're gonna get? How many people will buy a house? You know, we can do some math and I can get some round numbers and give you what would be expected of the first year, but it's very difficult.
Well, since you've been chief, how many, are we up, down, level?
We stay pretty level. We win some, we lose some. So it's really, it's staying pretty consistent since I've been chief.
I would say based on, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so you don't expect next April or so to come in and say, hey, guess what? We
I got 30 more people.
125 new volunteer firefighters that all own homes in Winston.
And understand, they have to meet these, you know,
Right,
these
right. There's a
too,
lot.
so it's not
There's a
like they
lot that
just
goes
joined,
into it.
because it may look easy on paper and it may look fun, but and it is fun to do this job, but it's not something that's for everyone. And I will say that I'm hoping that it will draw people in, but I can't tell you that it's gonna cost you $70,000 next year and $130,000 the following year. And I
Based
think-
on your best experience and what you see is this to attract or retain, take a certain amount of younger people that don't own, that may buy in town and decide to stay here
Yep.
because this is attractive to them.
Yep.
Give us your, if you
Honest-
can, at the next
Yeah,
meeting,
hypothesis, yep.
the worst case scenario from an expense standpoint.
Absolutely.
Man, if we hit all the gates, everything got great, everybody volunteered, here's what I think, based on experience over the last several years with membership count, where you think you are.
I can do that, and it's funny, because I was thinking as you're speaking, so a few years ago, I was asked, how much do you think this is gonna cost us? And when that was only $1,000 per person, and not up to 2,000, I estimated 25,000. So we go up to 2,000, and we're at 32,000. So just to give you a little idea of, it hasn't changed a lot over the 2.5 years from the beginning, so.
Good.
But we'll get something together.
We'll get something to Selectman Pozo's point. If we had 125 new members that all bought brand-new houses that were
Well-
built here, whole different ballgame.
So don't we have some properties we're gonna be
Sorry.
trying to move anyway?
We have some interesting meetings coming
For
up this week.
firefighters.
So.
I just have one thing that you guys can get to Paul for the next meeting, Chief Marsh and you too. How many members you have now, and how many volunteers did you have at your height? I pretty much know what yours is.
I was gonna say, it depends on how many years ago.
At the height, whenever you had the most members, how many were that, and how many you currently have? Because the idea of this is to get more volunteers.
It was 150 when I was in, I
Right.
believe.
And I was gonna say, so even when I started 15 years ago, there was probably 75 people on the list, maybe a little bit more, you know. But on the list and active are,
Right.
you know,
And what do we have now?
we have about 35 on the list.
Active?
Active.
In Winchester, our membership is capped at 30. It's probably been 15 years since there's been 30 members there. Right now, as far as active, we've got 7 active firefighters. And when we do our annual canvas every year, we send out a letter to about 450 homes. The last 3 years, we've sent letters along with an application for people to apply. We've gotten 0 applications.
You should do it again,
The local level.
It's a different world, buddy.
That's where we are with the group.
Whip you into shape. Whip us into shape.
Todd, you said at the meetings, I think you already know the answer to this question, what I'm gonna say. I joined the ambulance just shortly before the fire department in 2001. We had 65+ active members. Paid staff wasn't even in our vocabulary, right? We did 1,100 calls that year. Last year, we did almost 2,500 calls. We have about, today when I did the list, 8 semi-active members.
Catch your answer tonight.
homework for you guys. Any other questions for the board? Chief? Jeff? Chief, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think the consensus is put it on the next agenda.
Put it on, we'll get back, worst case scenarios, please, we have 3 meetings to discuss it, so, if you think of more, we can keep talking about it, because we have 3 meetings, to go with it, so, to make it official ordinance.
Item E, 24-43.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, can I go back?
Yep.
Also, an item that we left off is when you would like this to start as well. Make it effective July 1st, 2025. Things we can talk about at the next meeting, but also when you wish to roll this out. We did,
It's not budgeted, so.
it isn't, so where I would probably steer the board is a 7/1/2025 rollout, because we didn't account for the $32,000.
Is all the ARPA money counted for, or can we?
Unfortunately, you can't use ARPA money for it, but,
okay.
yeah, so anyways, just more questions.
All right, now moving on to 24-43, proposed line item transfers by the Director of Finance.
No,
I was just reading what was right here.
Actually,
Don't make
So,
her come back up. You can leave them all.
these are, end of year, so we're looking fiscal year, I know we talked about 23, but this is fiscal year 24 of overspent line items, and to bring those balances into zero so we can prepare for our audit. So it's roughly 140,120. Not looking at getting any money out of the general fund, this is all made up within the 24 fiscal year budget, just taking from surplus line items, moving it into line items that had deficits.
And just to clarify, this is not for every single line item. This is looking at departments as a whole, and to bringing departments as a whole to a positive, because that is what is looked at for the audit, as departments as a whole. So looked at the line items that are most in deficit that we could adjust and bring those to where we needed to bring the department as a whole to a positive.
Is there a motion?
Make a motion to approve the transfers?
Second.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Troy. Discussion? All in favor? Unanimous? Thank you. Item 11, we've lost all of our citizens, so we have no citizen comments. Item 12, Selectmen's comments and reports.
Yeah, I have a request. I'm gonna hand this out. When you have, last meeting I mentioned roads. So back in 2016, we had a road study done. And when we had the road study done, and this will be good because Jim's coming in October 7th. When we had the road study done, all the data was in an Excel file or a CSV file, where things could be sorted and you could look at things. And so one of the things that was in there is they put in what they called road segments. And in the road segments, it talked about the length of the road, the condition of the road as done by, at that time it was Leonard Engineering, did what they called a phaser rating on the roads. Then there was, over to the right on the spreadsheets, were like anticipated costs to fix that particular road segment. So anyway, so we got the data, and one of the things I started working with Jim on then was to take and put in, and I'm sorry for the printing, my printer was running out of ink, was to put in like the year and what you did on that particular, whatever road or road segment you did that particular year, is to mark down what you did on that road or road segment. And so here you would see fiscal year 17, 18, you know, what happened in those years. I don't know that if they've continued it or not. Some of the documents for the bond funding sort of look like what was in the spreadsheet, but the road Paiser ratings were updated, I think, I wanna say in 2019 or so. So when I look at, like, when we get information from people, like even tonight, we start talking about the numbers and the data behind things. When we had the building department come the other day, we asked them, you know, how many permits do you have? What are the costs per permits? And they came through with some nice data. This many permits for this amount of money, this many permits for that amount of money. So when we get our road report, which we've been getting for a while, we get a road report in a Word document. So the report comes in a Word document, takes a lot of time to write all the paragraphs, takes a lot of time to do that. But what it does is it tells you what's been working on, but what it doesn't tell you is the road segments that aren't there. At one point in time, I have a spreadsheet that shows like what a cost of a road could be, calculated within the Excel file. That calculates in if you put in the price of asphalt, if you put in the price of labor, if you put in the price of that, it automatically calculates what that road would cost you for this coming year. And if you remember, I asked the question, roughly how much it is to, you know, just rip and pave a road, a mile of road. We also did a document that showed the inflationary cost. So what was first originally contemplated in the 2016 report of what it would cost to fix that road segment, we did one that said, okay, this is 2016, then we updated, I think, in 19. And if we ran it out 6 years with a certain amount of inflation, what that road segment would then cost if you didn't fix it then. So I hand this to you because that document, the Excel file exists. And I would think that it might be a good idea, because so many new people on the board, that there is a lot of, like when I showed this other document, there is a lot of documents, and there are a lot of documents that are out there that give you quite a bit of information that helps understand the picture of things. Not that everybody agreed with the phaser rating. We know that there's one person that says all the time, my phaser rating was this, and they didn't do my road. And that's always a function of money and whatnot. But it might be good, and I don't know if they kept updating it. I don't know if Bart updates it. I don't know if the work they do, they put into the document that existed. But it might be good, you know, for this board to get a copy of the last greatest road segments that we have, that were last phaser rated with any information out there. Phaser rating stands for something, pavement, something.
I was
There
asking how you spell phaser, because
P-A-S-E-R.
okay, so it's spelled that way.
Yeah. So, because, you know, there's a lot of money spent on that report, and then it was updated. But I'm just saying there's another way for data to be looked at. Like, if you use something like this, then, and you had the years in that you did the work on those roads, or if you had the open.gov software, which probably has some of the same capabilities, or that other software that we paid for that you could use, they could spit out reports. So when the board has a question, or when you're going to budget next April, and somebody asks about the roads and how much money you're putting towards the roads, and we say, well, if we do this, this is how much these roads cost. It might be helpful to start looking at how we present the data in the formats, that would help people understand more. So I bring you this example because I have so many papers at home and files on my computer that I thought it would be helpful.
There was something like this done for every road in the town, right? Every road was looked at, and its condition was
Yeah, so
evaluated.
in here you, I know this one's hard to see.
But this isn't every road in town, this is just a
Yes, it
snapshot.
is. Yes, it is, every road right here in town. This is just one page, there's 8 pages.
Oh, okay.
But honestly, I didn't want to spend all my ink on all of you.
Ouch.
And then you would have taken home, thrown it out anyway. But if you see it, it's an alphabetical list, and the way that they did it is they did it in road segments, not the roads. So like on this one, you can see that Lake Street enjoys two lines. Holmes Road has 2 lines. Hinsdale enjoys 4 lines. Elm Street has 6 lines, but it's the segments in between where I think it's like the crossroads and stuff.
And is the higher the phaser rating, the worse the road is?
Well, they
No,
employed a priority level.
The one was the lowest, yeah.
You have this in an Excel? Can you email this to us?
Yeah, I'll give it to Paul, and then he can
Okay.
decide what to do. I might have sent him some too already.
So it's PACER scale, stands for pavement surface
I know we did with the update, I know we did that.
If
So-
you get it, I'd love to have that.
It would have to actually be looked at again, because in 5 years, there's some roads that
Right,
remain
well-
the same.
Well,
and
every
some
time,
that-
like today, right, the roads that are chip sealed, right? So the chip seal is being done on roads that were paved recently to keep them in good condition so that they don't deteriorate as fast. Right, so the numbers of roads on each level has changed over time, obviously, because when you know, like Hubbard Street is gonna be a great road, but not right now, but it will be if you redid it. And if this was something that, or the report in the other software we had that was updated as possible, then again, you could spit out, well, look at these have all been done, these only got this, or don't need that. It
When
just-
Jim comes next month also, it would be good to understand where we are overall with roads. And, you know, the bond package only paid for certain roads, and that's a number of years even to get those done. But there's so many other roads that need repair, and clearly it's the number one thing we hear about from the community. And while there's not a lot of money laying around, I don't know, it seems like we can't continue to go, okay, well, great news, we're doing 5 roads as part of the bond package, but we can ignore the other bunch of them that need so much work. I think we need to look at where we're at with roads and get, you know, what is the most updated version of this? And what's our 5-10-year plan, whatever the heck it's gotta be, to address this? Because right now, other than the bond roads, what are we doing?
Well, that's the issue, right? So in Torrington, they had various bonds out, and when they did the south end, which I traveled for a long time, it's a $58 million bond to do those roads. The roads and taking out sidewalks and whatnot. And then they had another bond as well. You know, so that's the only way to accelerate it's the only way to really accelerate getting more done, but then there has to be an appetite to pay after you've bonded. It's just like the earlier discussion.
But we definitely need an update.
The bonding is easy, says everybody wants, yes, let's fix them, and then you gotta pay. And they're usually not connected.
But we should come up with a plan, and again, is it a 5-year plan, 10-year plan? You know, Jimmy will tell you that these things have been neglected for 30 years. We can't continue to neglect them forever. We have to really address it. And I think if you ask the public what's their, you know, what is in their top 5 issues or top 3 issues, this is gotta be in the top 3. It's all we hear.
Well, that's why I brought it, is because that's all we heard for 3 budgets. And we haven't had it on any things here, so.
I think it's important, we need an update, but the one thing I wanna avoid is I don't wanna spend another $750,000 to update the engineering report that we've done twice to find out the condition of the roads. They're shot. I'm not an engineer, I'll tell you most of them are shot. So I don't need to bring in somebody to reassess them and say, oh, it went from a 3 to a 4, or 4 to a 2.
No, I don't think you need somebody.
No,
I think the people that work there know.
I would assume, we have the knowledge in this town.
I know you're in Selectmen's comments, but I think it's important that, a lot of great ideas, so just where we go with the roads report, and I know Selectman Marino, you and I had this conversation, just to get real with numbers, and we're gonna start talking numbers sooner rather than later, because we need to, but here's a prime example. Let's say we're very clear, we don't really put money in our budget to pave roads. So let's say we decide that we wanna go out and borrow $20 million on a bond. You take it out over 30 years. That bond payment is gonna be roughly about $1 million a year, over 30 years. That's a 3% tax increase, all things stayed the same. So, you know, we have to be real, and we can address the infrastructure, but we also have to, as Selectwoman Perez said, that everybody likes to go out and buy, but then it becomes real. And what real is, if you have to inject $1 million debt service payment into the budget, before we look at anything else, it's a 3% tax increase. If if everything stayed the same. Revenues go down, it's not a 3% tax increase, it's a 6% tax increase. Revenues go up, we have a potential of softening that. So, you know, I know Selectman Marino, you and I had that conversation one morning, but, you know, you have to look at it that way, that,
So that might be why it's a good idea to have the town planner and the roads at the same time, because they're,
correlated with one
well,
another.
they're connected.
Yes.
If this doesn't go up, that can't go up.
That's right.
So you need, the problem is, we need to fund the program, and we haven't done that. There has to be money set aside every year for, specifically for paving, and that's how you catch up. Bonding is not a good way to do it. 10 years down the road, you bonded them roads, and you're still paying for them, and they start failing. You need to have a program. Every other town has a program
How much would
that
you like to
specifically.
put in it?
Well, in my town, $450,000.
No, how much would you like to put in our
In
budget
this
for
town,
that program?
should be $1 million a year if we're paving,
Okay, so that'll be 1 mil.
to catch up, yes. Because you have double the roads that I have.
Right,
You
so
have 90 miles of road here,
81.
Hey,
or 81, so close.
done properly, whether it's milled and paved, if that's the proper way, or if you're
Well, they're beyond that, a lot of
okay,
them now. so-
right, but so let's say you do the road properly, whatever the proper methodology is, you're tearing up the whole road and you're restarting it from the beginning. Maintained, what's the life expectancy?
Depends. If they're chip sealed right after, you could get 15, 20 years out of them. If you don't, and if there's problems, there's a water issue, the drainage wasn't done, you're gonna get less. Anytime water gets underneath the surface and cracks the pavement, that opens it up for the salt to get in, which then expands it and ruins the road. So, you have to have a clean surface in order for the road to last.
So, but best case,
15 years best
15
case.
years?
If it's done correctly, that's yes. Because the years I've been doing this, the oils are getting worse and worse. So you used to be able to get a lot more out of a road. The oils are drying out really fast on these roads today. They're using a water soluble oil. It's not realistic to the environment we live in, but that's what they're doing. So because it's costly for the other oil, and there's environmentalists that say it's
to your
bad.
point,
so.
you need a continuing budget.
You need a budget.
If
Jimmy
you-
doesn't have a budget. I
And again, it's
looked.
gonna come down to money, right? So the residents really, when budget season comes, they have to determine, do you want the roads? And we wanna keep up with them, or don't we? Because
Well, you gotta look at
it's
it
gonna
this
cost
way.
money, we can't borrow it. I
If you're
agree.
gonna pay $1 million
borrow
in
it every
interest
time
for
we
the
need to do it.
bond a year, or you put the $1 million a year in the road, okay? The $1 million that you put in the road is costing you less than the bond money, because 30 years later, you're paying interest on the road that you did 30 years before. That's what I'm trying to get at. You need to have a consistent amount of, I mean, we don't have to do $1 million. You could do 750, you could do 500,000, something. Right now, I looked at Jimmy's line items, he has zero money for paving. That's
So-
why nothing's been done.
So to do a mile's worth of paving and to do the drainage with it per
$1 million.
for a mile,
Yep,
we have 81 miles of road.
correct.
So it's $81 million.
Correct.
So at $1 million
It
a
might
year,
even be more now.
at $1 million a year, it would take us 81 years to do
Correct.
it.
And then it's
I
like,
won't be here to see the last
Right.
road paved.
But
I'm gonna be honest, I'm
unfortunately-
staying, but.
So,
and if you factor in the
Enough.
15-year life expectancy,
right.
you just never dig out of this
So,
hole.
so Troy, that is and you know that the road bond was for the $1.5 million roads, that you would never fund
I
through.
understand
That you would never fund through a
But,
budget.
but like Paul said,
And it's
what
not
are
$1
we
million
doing over the
worth,
bond?
it's not $1 million of interest per year. It might be $1 million worth of interest
Right.
at the end
You're
of the
still
bond.
paying more.
I know, but you said per year.
And then he said, what are we doing besides the bonding? Well, we're doing nothing, because there's no line item for paving. You
And-
need to put money away every single year, so.
Okay,
you
well
have
then,
something to
if you
count
do
on.
that, then you gotta support the budget. Increase.
Support parts of the budget, yes.
Well, but that doesn't help. You know, you can't.
There's other places to take it from, I'm sorry. but-
Whether it's
We
bonding,
need Jimmy.
whether,
We'll have
and
Jimmy
this
here
will be
on
a
the,
Jimmy discussion,
October 2nd.
but whether it's
No, it's
bonding
the
or
same issue, whether he's here
a
or
light
not.
item or a
It's
combination.
willingness and it's about money. It's always about
It
a
is
dollar.
always about money.
No matter what you decide, no matter what you do here, for the most part, it's always involves a dollar.
Yeah, and whether it's bonding, whether it's a budget, or both,
Whether it's ambulance, whether it's fire,
Thank
whether
you.
it's
right.
recreation, whether it's, you know, supplies, whether it's the reverse 911 system, anything. It's always about
Fire, the ambulance.
what you're gonna, how you're.
Hence the reason to raise the grand list.
Yeah, the
We need
grand list
the
got
money,
through this, that's
so
what
we
we
need to get the grand list raised.
Without a doubt.
Most important thing.
Right.
Any other selectmen comments or reports? We're getting off track here.
No. Make motion to adjourn.
Actually, hang on, before you do, I think this discussion actually was really important, though, because what have we done about it? We got the budget passed, and we're doing all these other little things, but we haven't come back and talked about how the heck we're gonna pay for roads. And people want roads, so let's figure it out. Let's put it on our agenda, let's work on this, because we've gotta deal with it.
Monday, September 30th, 9:30 a.m. There's the promotion of the 2 latest sergeants for the Winchester Police Department in this case room, 9:30 a.m., Monday, September 30th. With that, Troy,
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
all in favor? Unanimous.
At the next meeting, I'm gonna oppose the adjournment, just because I've never seen anybody do it.
It's okay, we'll vote you. We'll just have a vote you.
Candy, I gotta ask you.
That's for your budget next year. Huh? I'm not gonna be here. Oh, you're not? That's your deal. Thank you. Oh,
Oh, I already signed what you wanted me to sign.
yeah, I believe I did too, right?
How's everything?
Yeah, we're all good.
Styrofoam.
Styrofoam's good.
Quiet. Everybody quiet.
It is. Haven't heard back from the Gulf Shrimp Company,
Oh,
but that'll be, I don't know if I scared them away when I said you may have to pay.
You know where I'm at, so let me know. Let me know if you need any assistance.
I don't know, they didn't respond when I said, how much do you have? Do you have a way to get it here? There may be a charge.
Right.
I don't know, so, but other people have reached out.
On that brand, I
Well,
know.
Jim's driving me crazy, but other than that, Jim.
who's driving?
Jim.
Oh, Todd.
So, you're killing me. You're killing me.
I am.
Abandoned the RTC fundraiser meeting.
You went?
I did, and I didn't want to stay.
I was going to go, but I ended up getting tied up here, and I didn't get out.
Night.
Good night.
Good night.
Just his vocal knowledge when he was a member.
David here?
Yeah. Between David and Matt throwing comments about Kevin still being our attorney and we're fools for that, and Troy jumping on how he was gonna grandstand tonight about the school thing, and we gotta terminate Nora, and we gotta fire the superintendents and the principal.
Troy was saying all that?
Yeah,
Who?
at the fundraiser meeting when Troy was all.
The RTC.
And I'm like, we need to let the investigation play out. We need to say it's an active police investigation. We